Chapter 241. Moonlight stretched their shadows long across the ground, and Lupin was grateful it wasn't a full moon tonight, otherwise the community would probably be deserted. Old Jack stopped beneath a tree, and Lupin followed his gaze. The trunk was crisscrossed with scratches and impact marks, scars from werewolves fighting one another. Fenrir liked to pit his followers against each other, breeding strength like one breeds venomous beasts. But tonight, beneath that tree of blood and scars, a group had gathered. There were old people and young, men with faces seamed by battle, and others missing limbs. They were all werewolves. The young wizards were home. These were the older members, sitting outside and playing wizard's chess. Damn it, I lost again. Haha, do you even know how to play? We survived in the wild. Where did you learn chess? Heh, I learned it when I was a child. Ever since I was bitten, I hadn't touched it. If it weren't for Mr. Silverhand, I probably wouldn't be sitting down to play chess in this life. The speaker was a middle-aged werewolf with a scarred face. Lupin recognized him as one of Fenrir's old lieutenants, brave, aggressive, and left marked by repeated frenzies. Across from him, a man with a receding hairline sighed. I couldn't have imagined a life like this. Before, I only wanted to survive. I never dared to hope for anything more. As werewolves at the bottom of wizarding society, they all felt the same. They used to be unemployable. When they did find work, their condition would be discovered and they'd be forced out. Opportunities came months or years apart. Ordinary life was a distant dream. They were excluded and driven away again and again. Some returned to the forest in self-exile. Others, full of resentment, joined Fenrir because they had no other way. They couldn't go to school. Lupin understood this all too well. He had struggled in society, but he had been one of the luckier ones. After becoming a werewolf, he still had the chance for a full education. Hogwarts, Gryffindor, a prefect's badge. Yet once he entered the wider world, he remained unwelcome. Someone far more mediocre or openly flawed could live more easily and find work. After Voldemort's fall, Lupin had wandered. He had to be sure he wouldn't hurt others once he turned. Now it's good, the scarred man said, sweeping away his gloom. Thanks to Mr. Johnny Silverhand, I can be paid for what I love. He grinned with gratitude. He was now a professional wizard's chess player. He'd placed well in a tournament last year. The prize money wasn't huge, but it covered his expenses and helped him save for a wolfsbane potion each month. Mr. Johnny Silverhand gave me a whole new life. In the community, I don't have to endure strange looks. The man with the receding hairline echoed the gratitude. Around them, a chorus of voices rose. I wandered for 7 years. Only in Nocturne Alley did I stop facing prejudice and finally earn a wage. The hollow-cheeked man wiped his eyes. I love reading. I found a job in a bookstore. For the first time, no one assumed I'd tear their books to shreds. A young man with metal-rimmed glasses spoke with emotion. My beloved and I have been together 10 years. If it weren't for the Little Wizard Fund set up by Mr. Johnny Silverhand, we probably wouldn't have had children. This world is too bitter. We don't want our children to suffer the same. The couple smiled, their faces soft with love. More people joined in. Families who adopted a young wizard, parents who came because a child had been turned, young people whose vigor had been replaced by weariness, girls who should have been finding love but had been cursed. They were all people whose lives had been restored under the care of the werewolf community and Johnny Silverhand. Before his flag rose, many simply wanted to live, some had wanted to die. Now they felt as if they'd come into the light for the first time, receiving kindness that had been denied them. Lupin fell silent. Old Jack looked at him and said calmly, See, the wizard you call dangerous is our savior. He may not have Dumbledore's lofty image, but he truly changed our destiny. Dumbledore stands on a pedestal. He may not discriminate against werewolves, but he never thought to change our condition. Mr. Johnny Silverhand is real. He drives away ill-intentioned people for us. He founded schools so werewolves can be educated. He fosters werewolf entrepreneurship, and the Little Wizard Fund will always provide a free wolfsbane potion for young werewolves. These are real things we can see. Old Jack regarded Lupin with the clear-eyed wisdom of an elder. Remus, the whole world can betray Mr. Johnny Silverhand, but we cannot. Werewolves cannot betray him. Even if you know who kills us, we will not. He spoke as both elder and friend. Old Jack was no fool, unschooled perhaps, but far-sighted. He had lived through Voldemort's era and remembered how hard it had been. He had once dreamed that Voldemort might lift the werewolves' fate. He was wrong. Voldemort would not have improved their lot. He would have turned them into killing machines. Dumbledore wouldn't do it either. He was too high above to see those at the bottom. "We already have our own savior," Old Jack said finally. "We don't need another to make one for us." He smiled and added, "Remus, once you felt sunlight on your skin, tasted warm milk, felt safe, you're not willing to go back to a dark, sunless valley, even if it means death." His words were simple, but they hit like a bell. In Lupin's head, a voice sounded, "Remus, put away your arrogance. They don't need to be saved. They are already in the light." Chapter 265, Old Barty and the Election. John hadn't given Old Jack's loyalty much thought. He hadn't expected his actions to inspire such fierce devotion. Perhaps his priorities were different from others. Dumbledore was pure blood. Even without overt prejudice, a trace of pure blood condescension ran through him. He hadn't even noticed his own paternalism. In the words of the Muggle world, it could be called indifference. Dumbledore concerned himself with the survival of the magical world. The small matters at its bottom didn't draw his attention, except, perhaps, for Harry Potter. As for Voldemort, he was a product of a love potion, so some said, inherently incapable of understanding love and affection. He was obsessed with establishing authority through fear, demanding constant killing to assert dominance. He was never meant to feel what ordinary people feel. And Harry, though he grew up among Muggles, once he encountered magic, he leaned toward wizards. Magic was the only thing that ever gave him a secure place in the world. He acquired everything after entering the magical world: wealth at Gringotts, the title of savior, friends at school, kind elders. He enjoyed it all. Life among Muggles had felt like imprisonment. Even Mr. Weasley, who had close ties to Muggles, could be oblivious to the damage he caused. The Weasleys had once trampled half the Dursleys' living room without a thought. Arrogance without self-awareness. For werewolves, savior was often a name heard from afar. Dumbledore was untouchable. Voldemort was malicious. Only Johnny Silverhand brought change directly. Whether by deliberate performance or an unintentional display of resources, he gave people concrete, tangible improvements, and that was enough. Lupin had kept his promise and left after nightfall. John was busy with Old Barty's campaign, needing to secure enough votes. The best way? Money. Throwing real gold and silver. Simple, crude, and effective. The Minister of Magic might have seemed a distant prize to ordinary people. Immediate, tangible benefits swayed them more. Under John's impetus, Old Barty's poll numbers rose. Old Barty was a terrible public speaker, so John hired a famous braggart, Lockhart, to coach him. This tactic, common in Muggle elections, bewildered the simple wizards. Watching Old Barty speak with passion on a stage where free eggs were handed out and extravagant promises were made left many hungry for more. Old Barty promised crackdowns on illegal poaching of magical creatures. He vowed to lead the local magical community to surpass other countries, to boost local manufacturing, and even to reduce taxes on alcohol in special areas. He pledged to defeat the remaining Death Eaters within 3 years and wipe them out in 5. One grand promise after another, dozens of them. The local wizards were ecstatic. Even John was nervous for Old Barty. Lockhart could boast as a writer, but could an earnest, serious man do the same? Yet between real money and grand promises, Old Barty outpaced Amelia Bones by a clear margin. Amelia's numbers sagged partly because the press delighted in slandering her. A minor mistake, asking an assistant for a glass of water, became tomorrow's headline. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, 3 inhumane acts of harshness toward subordinates. A small thing could be blown up into a workplace bullying scandal. Once she failed to smile at Old Barty, and the papers said she was petulant and resentful toward the election. A portrait of narrow-mindedness and autocracy stuck to her. Amelia was furious and helpless. The public believed the stories. Her votes barely budged. All of this was John's doing. He had Rita write articles in the papers. The Daily Prophet's editor-in-chief wanted to stop it, but the press and the promises had their effect. Chapter 242. John bought into the newspaper as an investor. They couldn't stop him. In the end, they even had to agree to let him write alongside them. John had offered too much. Rita's standing rose again, and she couldn't hide her grin. Having been forced into the job at first, the compensation she'd received made her fiercely loyal to John. At last, everything settled. Old Barty was elected Minister of Magic. The result pleased almost everyone, all except Amelia's faction. Some ministry officials celebrated at home in small ways. Old Barty's first test came quickly, an incident in which Harry Potter had used a Patronus charm in front of Muggles, and Dumbledore had stepped up as Harry's defense. Two names hung over the case: Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore. One was the celebrated savior of the wizarding world, the other the headmaster of Hogwarts and the most powerful wizard alive. Dealing with even one of them was delicate. With both, it was a nightmare. The ministry had to protect its credibility while managing public expectations and Dumbledore's reputation. Only then did old Barty realize why Amelia had looked so pleased after his election. She'd tricked him. The Office for the Improper Use of Magic was actually subordinate to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He resented her quietly. John, however, had already known. He had seen the ministry's letter himself and thought it a good chance to curb Dumbledore's power. On the day old Barty was elected, something changed for Harry as well. That summer, he found himself back at the Dursleys, stuck in the same small, controlled existence. The Dursleys were in high spirits. They'd received a winning letter from an unknown sender and had rushed out celebrating, leaving Harry alone in the house with no way to go anywhere. Then he heard a crash from the kitchen downstairs. Harry sat up and listened. The Dursleys couldn't have come back so quickly. He hadn't heard their car. After a few seconds, voices reached him. Thieves? He slipped out of bed, grabbed the wand from the bedside, and stood by the door, listening. The door opened suddenly, and a dim group stood in the hallway, all looking up toward him. Harry felt a jolt of alarm. Someone spoke, and his heart thudded. Put down your wand, child, lest you dig out someone's eyes. The voice was gruff and familiar. Moody. Harry's first thought was of Ardolfo's impersonation of Moody, and he tensed further. Professor Moody, he said uncertainly. Moody growled. Professor or not, I don't rightly know. I haven't been sober for long. That whole charade was too much. Even now, Moody muttered about being tricked by Confundus and impersonation. He remained on edge. Harry relaxed a little when another voice answered. It's all right, Harry. We're here to take you away. Remus. Relief flooded Harry. Lupin's voice always made him feel safe. Remus looked tired, a little worn as if he'd been running errands without rest. His best clothes seemed a bit threadbare. But when he saw Harry, a broad, warm smile spread across his face. Harry felt a dozen questions rise and gave a small smile back. A young witch at the front of the group held her wand high and laughed. He looks just how I pictured, she said. She was the youngest there, pale, heart-shaped face, bright black eyes, and a shock of spiky violet hair. Hello, Harry, she greeted with a lively, playful smile. At the back stood a dark-skinned, bald wizard with a golden cup earring in one ear. He regarded Harry with a slow, thoughtful look. He looks exactly like James, he murmured, nostalgia in his tone. Except for those eyes, wheezed a silver-haired man nearby. Those are Lily's eyes. It felt like a family gathering. All these adults looking at Harry as if he were a child brought out to meet distant relatives. Moody remained distrustful, understandably so after being impersonated. He wanted proof this really was Harry. Remus and the others were clearly acting as escorts. Harry, what does your Patronus look like? Remus asked. A stag, Harry replied, a little nervously under so many gazes. He tucked his wand into the back pocket of his jeans, and Moody exploded. Don't put your wand there. You know how many wizards, even more powerful than you, have burned themselves doing that. Moody's neuroses were on full display. Harry thought Ardolfo's impersonation had been too restrained in comparison. The violet-haired witch leaned forward with interest. Who burned there? None of your business. Just don't put your wand in your back pocket. Moody snapped. She rolled her eyes theatrically. As they prepared to leave, Harry learned that the young witch, Nymphadora Tonks, who preferred to be called Tonks, had sent the fake winning letter to the Dursleys through the Muggle post to get them out of the house. Harry admired the cleverness. He was eager to go, but Remus said they had to wait for a signal. While they waited, Harry met the others properly. Moody needed no introduction. He had, after all, taught Harry that year, or rather, his impersonator had for most of it. Besides Tonks and Kingsley Shacklebolt, there were Elphias Doge, Daedalus Diggle, Emmeline Vance, Sturgis Podmore, and Hestia Jones. All of them had come willingly. Harry opened his mouth to ask about Lord Voldemort, but before he could finish, they all hushed him. Moody barked that he should shut his mouth. "You can't say anything here. It's too dangerous," he explained, his magical eye rotating with vigilance. Then Moody's eye swung toward the window. "Is that—" Harry followed the motion and saw, not far away, a house much larger than the Dursleys. He stared. "That's John's house," he said. "John? John Wick?" Moody asked, suddenly serious. Remus's expression grew complex, like someone weighing things unsaid. Harry felt irritated. Their faces suggested some secret he wasn't privy to. Moody said nothing more and turned away. Remus offered a bright note. Harry would be riding a broomstick back with them. That was good news. At least he knew how they'd be traveling. He went upstairs to pack. Tonks, seeing him in a sour mood, changed her hair color in a fluttering joke. She was a metamorphmagus and could alter her appearance at will, trying to make him smile. But the thought of Ardolfo and impersonation just soured Harry's mood again. Back downstairs, a red spark shot into the sky outside, the signal. Moody thumped Harry on the head with the flat of his hand, hard enough to make Harry wince, and pressed his wand to Harry's shoulder. A cold trickle spread through his skin. Disillusionment charm. It was the first time Harry had felt a charm like that. The sensation was strange and marvelous. He thought fleetingly of John's invisibility, and Moody explained, "Your invisibility cloak will billow on a broomstick and give you away. Use the disillusionment charm to blend in." Tonks clapped, pleased. A second spark, green, flared in the sky. Moody unlocked the back door, and they filed out one by one. Harry was thrilled, finally not isolated, but the excitement was short-lived. Moody had assigned tasks carefully, but he hadn't expected magic on John Wick's roof. The first three who flew up were sent tumbling down like dumplings. From the attic, a dog's head poked out, barking wildly. It was Tom. August 12th was the day of Harry's trial in the Wizengamot, and John intended to strip Dumbledore of power that day. Even if you are Dumbledore, you still have to pay a price. His eyes narrowed. This was the chance to undermine Dumbledore's authority as headmaster. Even if he couldn't remove him outright, he could force massive concessions. Images of Dumbledore and burning fiendfire flashed through John's mind. His breathing quickened. By the time he realized it, objects around him were already beginning to levitate. "I didn't expect myself to be so impatient," he muttered, pressing a hand to his chest. Chapter 267, Deals and Candidates. With old Barty now in office as minister, his old post as director needed filling. Percy was promoted to head of the International Magical Law Office, a powerful role overseeing external immigration jurisdiction, a post of real authority. Had Percy not been so recently installed, old Barty would have moved him to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, but Amelia strongly opposed that. Pierce wasn't promoted. He knew he wouldn't stay in his current role long. At the latest next year, he'd be transferred to the Wizengamot. Oz had become an Auror in the Auror office and no longer needed to travel constantly. Her promotion had come as a surprise. Tang Mi had invited her to the manor for a banquet to celebrate. At first, Oz had thought Tang Mi's invitation was just a simple dinner, but it turned out to be a grand affair for prominent figures. High-ranking ministry officials clinked glasses in the manor. Pure-blood families and wealthy patrons gathered, people who, to Oz, had always been untouchable. The host, John, wore a silver mask. Old Barty's elevation had won tax-exempt status for silver handseller, effectively lining John's pockets. Changes in power brought huge rewards. Old Barty would remember favors and be generous in return. Inside Silverhand Manor, Old Barty had become the new Minister of Magic. He wore a specially tailored robe, and after years of austerity, finally smiled with genuine satisfaction. Many long-standing ambitions had been realized, and John had played a part. He clinked glasses with Old Barty, who said gratefully, "Mr. Silverhand, I will always remember your help." "Old Barty, today is a happy day. Let's put things aside for now." John smiled, unhurried, and added, "You'll be very busy. I'll save a good bottle for you to enjoy whenever you have time." The casual warmth pleased old Barty. It wasn't a patronizing lecture, but the easy banter of friends. He finished his wine, burped, and sent an ice bubble floating off with a laugh. "This wine is irresistible." Pierce stood 3 paces away, smiling, and when old Barty grew unsteady, he stepped forward to help him. "Mr. Silverhand, I'll assist the minister out." "Pierce, I believe you'll shine even more soon." John raised his glass. Pierce bowed and escorted old Barty away. John scanned the crowd and found old Jack, who seemed somewhat restrained. John walked over with a smile. Old Jack's expression was deferential. "Old Jack, your presence honors me." "Mr. Johnny Silverhand, it is my honor." Old Jack suppressed his excitement. His voice trembled. "I never thought werewolves could sit and vote at the ministry." "Calm down, old friend," John said, patting ash from the fireplace off his sleeve with a chuckle. "You're a counselor. Minister Crouch is preparing to reform the Werewolf Capture Unit and the Werewolf Registration Office and hopes I can recommend suitable candidates. I think Zuo Fei and Chu Dai would be excellent choices." "Sir, is that true?" Old Jack blurted, more excited than when he'd learned of his council seat. The Werewolf Capture Unit, part of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, was responsible for seizing werewolves. Old Jack had nearly been a target himself. These agencies had always been tools of discrimination. The Werewolf Registration Office was worse. Once a werewolf's details were logged, they were monitored indefinitely. For werewolves to have representation in those institutions would be transformative, almost like giving them rights equal to Auror's. Old Jack was so moved he could barely stand. "How did you manage that, sir?" he asked. "The reallocation of power, old Jack. I promise the werewolf community will be better off." John regarded werewolves as victims of a curse, victims like Nagini, who shouldn't be punished for what afflicted them. He'd told old Barty that some positions were worth trading as bargaining chips. They meant little to most wizards, but could be a lifeline to marginalized groups. Solemnly handing the appointment letter to old Jack, John received unexpected news. Lupin had approached old Jack, hoping to bring the werewolves over to his side. "Sir, I refused him," old Jack said with clear conscience. "Dumbledore has never stood for werewolves. We won't join him." John was moved by the loyalty. "You're my friend, old Jack. I wouldn't doubt you." He embraced old Jack, surprised at how far Dumbledore's influence reached, even into the werewolf community. Both the Order of the Phoenix and the Death Eaters were seeking allies. The Death Eaters were largely in hiding now. The Star Disciples had been hit by a coordinated counterattack while operating outside, a strike thought to be mounted by hidden Death Eaters. Without central leadership, the Order had been vulnerable, and Lord Voldemort had yet to appear among them. John swirled his wine and peered at the tiny bubbles. "Tom, where on earth have you gone?" He still hadn't decided who should be headmaster of Hogwarts, but he had ideas about the defense against the dark arts post. "Tang Mi, you should go." Tang Mi blinked in surprise. John explained, "You're a Hogwarts graduate. As defense against the dark arts professor, you'd be the most qualified." Tang Mi laughed weakly. "Sir, please don't joke." Tang Mi was hardly in a position to teach his boss. He considered himself competent, but not to the level of instructing John. John knew how Tang Mi felt and had been teasing him. The real candidate, he made clear, wasn't Tang Mi. It had to be someone from the ministry, and someone Tang Mi knew. "We need someone to counterbalance Dumbledore," John mused. "They have to be obedient." Removing or diminishing Dumbledore's power required a process. John planned to have the ministry send an investigator. Harry's use of magic outside school was a breach they could exploit, enough leverage that even Dumbledore might be forced into concessions. He'd considered Percy for the job, but that would strain Percy's family ties. Changing course, John turned to Tang Mi. "How skilled is Oz Hyld?" Pierce had mentioned her before, and Tang Mi's face brightened. "She's the best Auror, only held back by her background. If it weren't for that, she'd have been head of the Auror office long ago." John's interest was piqued. "Then let her take it. An Auror as defense against the dark arts professor. There's no better choice." He smiled. "You're quite fond of this friend of yours." "Just a regular friend," Tang Mi stammered, kicking awkwardly at the floor. John waved a hand. "She's a good fit, but we still need a foil. To take on a man like Dumbledore, You also needed petty, small-minded people, someone whose pettiness could be used to undermine him. John racked his brain before a name surfaced, a woman in pink they'd seen at the ministry fountain the day old Barty was elected. "Do you remember that woman in pink?" he asked Tang Mi. Tang Mi's expression soured. "You mean Dolores Umbridge? If it's her, I absolutely despise her." The memory made Tang Mi unusually angry. "During my time as an Auror, that pink toad made my life miserable. Her hunger for control made her want to control everyone." John's eyes lit up. A petty bureaucrat with an obsessive need for control would clash with Dumbledore. Perfect. He pressed Tang Mi for more. From Tang Mi's account, Umbridge was the same breed as Pierce, but worse. Where Pierce knew how to flatter those above him and ignore smaller people, Umbridge took pleasure in making life difficult for anyone within her reach. All of Rita Skeeter's fabrications about Amelia, if applied to Umbridge unchanged, would still be merciful. Chapter 244. He's a talent. To John, that was the perfect kind of talent for a scapegoat. Given Umbridge's insufferable need for control, Dumbledore probably couldn't stand her either. If Dumbledore ever did get rid of her, John would applaud. He'd already given Voldemort a gift. He might as well give Dumbledore one too. Just as he snapped his fingers to summon old Barty, Riddle, the black long-eared owl, flew in with an envelope. The timing was impeccable, and the letter had been prepared with a certain slyness. Few knew Riddle preferred the scent of lavender. As Johnny Silverhand's personal messenger, Riddle received more than his fair share of attention. At Silverhand Manor, John had torn out the old rose beds and replanted lavender with seeds sent by Pierce. Riddle often lingered there and came back carrying that scent. Someone had deliberately perfumed the letter with lavender, and Riddle had rested it on top. John opened it, chuckled, and scratched Riddle's head. "Looks like you've been well fed," he said. Riddle purred and narrowed his eyes. Tang Mi peered over, curious. "My lord, what does it say?" John held the envelope between his fingers, smirking. "Umbridge is volunteering herself. She wants me to recommend her to old Barty." What a coincidence. He'd been planning to push Umbridge into the fire pit, and now she'd shoved herself forward. In the ministry, she'd been part of Fudge's circle. With Fudge's fall, she'd lost influence and been living in fear since old Barty rose to power. Everyone knew old Barty's rise was tied to Johnny Silverhand. Case in point, Scrimgeour, once head of the Auror office, was now shunted to the Centaur department, effectively a bureaucratic exile. To avoid being dismissed, Umbridge had spent heavily and managed to get Pierce to open a channel. The letter was her product after doing some careful research. Knowing John hated empty flattery, she had written plainly, pros and cons, and promised to be his most loyal ally. "Interesting. She's a little cunning," John said. Umbridge must have guessed he liked lavender and had used that trick. It paid off. He stroked Riddle's round belly, then casually handed the letter to Tang Mi, who took it with a look of disgust. "Pierce is clever. He doesn't act without direction." Pierce had given her the channel and even sent a note acknowledging he might have overstepped. John told Tang Mi to reply to Pierce with praise. He'd done well. Let Umbridge take the position that would make her unpopular. The ministry needed a bad cop and a good cop. Oz would collect the goodwill for future promotions. Umbridge would be the one to absorb the hatred. She couldn't get much worse. With that settled, John met old Barty to finalize the appointment for the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor and the Hogwarts senior investigator position. Dumbledore would have to make concessions after August 12th. If he still wanted to teach Harry, he would have to accept the arrangement. After wrapping up the details, John removed his mask and returned to Privet Drive. Tom was waiting proudly at the door, tail wagging when he saw John. John crouched and sniffed. "Did you bite someone?" The dog's mouth smelled of blood, and a torn scrap of fabric lay on the grass. John recognized the material at a glance, wizarding robes. His expression cooled. He went down to the basement to check the surveillance. The footage made him smile in a way that was part amusement, part satisfaction. Tom had charged a group of wizards and been terrifyingly effective. Several witches and wizards chased him. Lupin tried to calm things down, but was met with a low growl. A square-jawed young wizard seemed about to cast a spell when Lupin and Moody intervened. "Don't use magic on the dog," Moody roared, startling everyone. A confused Tonks asked, "What's going on now?" Lupin ducked under Tom's snapping jaws and said with an awkward smile, "This is John Wick's dog. Sirius and John met him before." That memory was still awkward. Sirius occasionally rubbed his left ribs even now. Moody, already hobbling, tried to back away, and Tom bit down on his wooden leg with a crunch, sending splinters flying. Moody yelped, "What kind of dog has a bite like that?" Harry himself hadn't been bitten. He'd used a disillusionment charm, invisible to Tom, though detectable by scent, which only made Tom more frantic. Lupin covered their retreat, and the wizards scrambled off the lawn. Tom latched onto one wizard's calf. Lupin eventually pulled him free, but the leg bled. John shook his head with quiet amusement. "A legendary auror and a former defense professor, all running from my dog." He opened Tom's mouth to inspect the teeth, pleased. "Looks like the experiments paid off. Your teeth have good compatibility with werewolf material." Tom wasn't the same dog anymore. Since the Crumplehorn Snorkack project, John had been experimenting with enchanting animals. Normally, ordinary animals lack the magical compatibility of true magical creatures, so enchantments usually fail. But John, an alchemy master, had modified Tom's teeth with materials from magical creatures. He'd built a kind of vessel inside Tom for magic, and in the process introduced a certain toxicity. The square-jawed wizard had been lucky. If John had waited and used basilisk material, one bite could have been lethal. He stroked Tom and looked back at the trace of blood on the robe fragment. Since Lupin and Moody were involved, it's probably the Order of the Phoenix. Here to pick up Harry, most likely. Harry's invisibility cloak explained why John hadn't seen him. The Order's presence confirmed how seriously they valued the boy. John picked up the bloodied fabric, held it in his right hand, and hovered his left an inch above. Blood tracing. The drop of blood on the scrap rose and congealed, forming an arrow in midair. A red thread extended into the void, about to lock onto the trail. Then John frowned. The blood, as if sucked dry of its magic, smoked white and vanished. "It's protected," he muttered. The location was in a safe house-like place. John had almost pinned it down, but the trace had been wiped clean. He couldn't even remember what he'd just seen. Fidelius charm? The answer was obvious and irritatingly effective. He hadn't expected Dumbledore to be so quick to secure a hiding place. John had hoped to find the Order's location for future plans. Apparently, he'd underestimated how fast they would conceal themselves. Harry's journey was long and convoluted. It wasn't the burrow. Moody had refused to risk it. He'd used Dumbledore's Deluminator to sweep the nearby lights into it and walked with Harry tucked inside his coat. Lupin and Tonks hauled Harry's trunk, and the others flanked them with wands at the ready. The procession looked like it could have required Lord Voldemort himself to interfere. "This is it," Moody grunted, pressing a slip of parchment into Harry's hand. The thin, slanted handwriting looked oddly familiar. Harry read, "The Order of the Phoenix headquarters is located at Grimmauld Place, London, number 12. "What's the foe?" he began. "Don't say it here," Moody snapped. He was on edge, expecting a Death Eater to leap out and cast Avada Kedavra. Once Harry had memorized the address, Moody snatched the scrap and burned it. They stood before number 11, but there was something wrong. The house to the left was number 10, and the one on the right was number 13. Number 12 didn't exist. "Think about what you just memorized," Lupin said, gently but firmly, just as he always did in class. Harry concentrated on the phrasing in his head, and the world shifted. Between numbers 11 and 13, a battered door congealed from the empty space. Its filthy walls and gloomy windows fit strangely among the neat row houses, as if a house had been wedged into a gap that hadn't been there before. The dilapidated facade of number 12 had appeared. Chapter 245, Harry stood dumbfounded on the top of the stairs while Moody shoved him inside. The paint on the front door flaked and was scored with scratches. The silver knocker was shaped like a coiled snake, and there was no keyhole or mail slot. Lupin tapped the door with his wand. The sound rang like chains. The door opened. Tonks burst in, breathless. "Oh my God, Sturgis, stop screaming! We're about to be exposed." They all turned to Sturgis Podmore. His face was ashen and his lips trembled. He made a faint animal whimpering sound. "Sorry," he said. "I can't stop the bleeding." Lupin knelt, peered at the calf, and went suddenly serious. The wound was deep and ragged, down toward the bone. "There's magic on this," he said grimly. "It won't heal." Harry stared. They'd been chased by a dog, Tom, John Wick's little dog, not a mountain beast. It made no sense. But Lupin, who had once taught defense against the dark arts, did not make mistakes like that. Moody bent to examine the wound and nodded. "Dark arts," he said. "They hauled Sturgis inside, and somebody was sent to deal with the blood outside. Once indoors, he was able to cry out properly, and his screams drew others from upstairs and the kitchen. No one seemed to notice a car idling on Grimmauld Place. A man in it watched, wide-eyed, as a handful of broomstick-bright figures descended from the sky and vanished into the house. Hermione and Ron were pulled downstairs by the commotion. The Weasleys were all there except Percy. Mrs. Weasley sent Ginny back to her room with a stiff look. This was not something for a child. Sirius immediately hunted out Lupin and demanded to know what had happened. "Bitten by a dog," Lupin said with a bleak smile. "A dog?" Sirius's eyes widened. "What sort of dog bites someone like that?" Snape, who'd followed, knelt and examined the wound with cold thoroughness. "There's a very powerful curse embedded in this injury," he said. "It prevents healing." Sturgis, pale as paper, whispered, "Can I still save this leg? If we can catch the dog that bit you, perhaps there's a way to undo it," Snape said. He sounded annoyed and troubled in equal measure. He knew destructive curses, and this bite resembled them, but he didn't know the counter-charm. Sirius glared at Lupin. "Which dog was it?" Harry, feeling his throat tighten, said, "It was Tom, John Wick's dog." A stunned hush fell. Hermione covered her mouth. It seemed impossible that such a tiny creature could leave such a wound. Snape's eyes narrowed. "What idiocy did you lot do to provoke this?" Harry bristled at the scorn in Snape's voice, and Sirius shot to his feet. "Severus, it wasn't his fault," he snapped. "Wasn't his fault," Snape said, mocking. "John Wick isn't the sort of man one provokes lightly." The name had an effect. Sirius's face tightened. There was a dull pain behind his ribs, as if a memory twisted there. Lupin tried to diffuse it. "It's nothing to do with John. We accidentally wandered onto his lawn." "You mean a group of wizards were chased off by a dog?" Snape's tone was half contemptuous, half incredulous. Lupin's smile was wry. "It's humiliating, but yes." "Right," Moody grunted, tapping his wooden leg once. "Stop dallying and save Sturgis Podmore's leg. We aren't going to lose a man's leg before the war even starts." Bill Weasley, formerly a curse-breaker for Gringotts and familiarly practical with curses and counter-curses, knelt and studied the wound. "It's bad," he admitted. "There's a venom at work. Sometimes the poison itself can be the antidote." "How would you even get that?" Snape cut in. "You want us to catch the dog and pull out its teeth?" "We could use them for some kind of potion," Bill said quietly. He looked uncomfortable delivering the idea. Hermione lurched to her feet in alarm. "No, John would kill you." John Wick's reputation was not subtle. Anyone who hurt his dog would never see daylight again, the adults murmured. Sirius, flushed and out of his depth, tried to explain. He and Tom were friends. He'd relied on the dog in hard times. "You can't very well go after Tom and pull his teeth," he said. "You don't want to make John Wick angry." A few of the older wizards who didn't know the story, Daedalus Diggle among them, peered at the talk with curiosity. Snape only curled his lip and said, "This isn't some enfant terrible. John Wick is a gifted wizard with dangerous skill." Bill nodded toward Sturgis. "At least I can dull the pain." He took out his wand and cast a gentle charm. The calf remained injured and pale, but the agony eased and Sturgis stopped sobbing. Snape's expression never brightened. Their interrupted meeting clearly rankled him. Ron swallowed and, unable to help himself, turned to Hermione. "It won't hold a grudge about me kicking Crookshanks, will it?" he whispered. Crookshanks was one of Tom's companions. Ron was a child in his worry. Hermione rolled her eyes but said nothing. The adults began to prepare to return to their meeting. Bill started to fashion a bandage. Mrs. Weasley firmly shepherded the kids upstairs. As Harry was about to follow, the scarred front door opened again, and Tonks burst back in, breathless. "There's a muggle," she announced. Moody snapped. "Get him away. Obliviate him." Tonks's face fell. "I couldn't. He drove off, very fast." Moody's wooden leg thumped the floor as he strode toward the door. "You didn't obliviate him?" Tonks clenched her right hand and swallowed. "I tried." He slammed the car door on my hand and he threw my wand out of the car. Harry froze on the stairs. Nothing's going right today, Sirius muttered, straightening his collar and scowling. A muggle had seen them, and worse, had disarmed Tonks. That could not stand. Sirius, who had long since shed his fugitive status, bolted for the door. With a single practiced movement, he slipped free and was gone. A moment later, he was a large black dog racing down the street. Snape sighed. So much for the meeting. Too many surprises had piled up in one day. The three of them on the stairs, Harry, Ron, Hermione, exchanged weary looks as the house burst into movement. Far away, in the car that had sat on Grimmauld Place, the muggle driver, Watson, remembered it all with a cold sweat. He hadn't come to spy or mug wizards. He'd come to inspect real estate, to see whether the area would support a hotel. He'd been planning, sitting quietly with the engine off and his lights down, when a dozen figures had arrived on brooms and vanished into the house. A witch had come running toward his car. She raised a wand, and Watson, who'd recently learned a few tricks from his son Andre, panicked. He threw the car door open, knocked her wrist aside, and grabbed at the wand. When he couldn't get it, he slammed the woman's hand in the door. She cried out and let go. He shoved her away, jumped in, and drove off. In a haze of adrenaline, he tossed the wand into the bushes by the curb and whooped to himself, pounding the steering wheel. Exciting! Too exciting! He had once survived a hail of bullets and still found himself exhilarated. He glanced in his rear view, stopped at an intersection, and convinced himself he'd shaken them off. He nearly phoned his son to tell him what a thrill it had been. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a large black shape on the pavement. A chill ran up his spine. Watson's instincts cried that something was very, very wrong. Instead of running away, the dog bolted straight for him. Watson didn't think twice. He stomped on the accelerator. The car shot forward, backfiring black smoke, as a red flash struck the spot where the animal had been. Mid-stride, the great black dog blurred and reshaped into a man, who apparated with a bang right in front of the car. Watson yanked the handbrake. The rear of the car fishtailed beautifully and slammed into the black-haired man. He flew across the road. Watson's heart hammered. For a moment he thought he'd killed him. He fumbled for the pistol on the passenger seat, opened the door, and crept over. "He's not dead, is he?" he muttered, more to himself than to anyone. 1,000 possibilities ran through his head. He grit his teeth. "In for a penny, in for a pound," he told himself. "I'll just throw him in the sea." When he reached the man and flipped him over, a wand was already leveled at him. "Fuck!" Watson swore. White light sparked from the wand. Watson fired wildly. The pistol's magazine emptied in a staccato. Both man and muggle staggered. The stranger had been hit, bullets in his arm and leg, blood running, but as a wizard, he could recover. He hauled himself up, cursing under his breath. Damn it! Almost got killed by a muggle. He started to drag himself away, preparing to leave, and raised his wand to wipe Watson's memory. "Tsk-tsk-tsk! Look who it is!" A mocking voice cut through the tense air. Sirius froze and turned. From the shadows on the empty street stepped a man in a wide trench coat and a cowboy hat, hands folded, a grin on his face. "Sirius Black," he said, as if calling roll. Sirius's face darkened. "Fingerman Ox." The newcomer, Uxer, Fingerman Ox, had once been a bounty hunter who'd chased Sirius relentlessly when he was a fugitive. He clicked his tongue and sneered. "Look at you, Sirius Black, the noble pure blood. Why do you look like a stray? Been wanted again?" "Sirius, what are you doing here?" he added warily. Sirius cursed his poor luck, of all nights to be in such bad shape. Oakser shrugged and tipped the brim of his hat. "Don't worry, I changed jobs." He pulled a silver scythe from his coat and said softly, "I take contracts on Death Eaters now." "Star Disciples," Sirius said, eyes narrowing. He'd seen a wanted poster in the leaky cauldron. The Star Disciples were a new, frightening group, dark wizards turned hunter-killers. Formerly famous dark wizards, the Twin Stars, the Executioner, men who had killed for sport and now hunted others. The Fingerman was the kind who loved killing. "You want in?" Oakser chuckled. "I can introduce you." "No," Sirius said coldly. "With people like you? No. Weren't you a wanted criminal once too?" Oakser threw back. "Don't act so high and mighty. You've killed Sirius." His gaze drifted to Watson. "A muggle. Are you going to kill him?" "Just a memory charm," Sirius said. If he'd meant to kill Watson, He wouldn't have left himself bleeding like this. Uxer shrugged, and something like a piece of human skin fell from his pocket. He picked it up without changing expression, patted dust off it casually. Sirius's eye twitched. After Uxer melted back into the night, Sirius let out a shaky breath. He turned to cast the charm, but at that moment the car's engine revved. Its taillights winked out as it drove away. "Aye," Sirius swore, furious and helpless. Upstairs at Grimmauld Place, Harry, Ron, and Hermione finally saw each other again. The room was dim. 2 single beds were pushed together. So much had happened that none of them could unpack it all at once. "So, Dementors attacked you?" Ron asked first, eyes wide. Hermione was indignant. "Harry is the victim, and he still has to go to the Ministry? I checked the files. The Ministry can't expel you. The Reasonable Restriction of Underage Wizardry Act allows magic when life is threatened." She kept talking in a rush. Harry and Ron exchanged a look. This was classic Hermione. Harry closed the door and noticed Hedwig perched nearby. Ron complained, "She's been restless, almost pecking us to death." Harry felt awkward. He'd told Hedwig to make sure Ron wrote back properly, or keep nipping him until he did. The months of being kept in the dark had soured him. "We tried to reply too," Ron said. "Hermione was worried sick. She said if you were left without news, you might do something stupid, but Dumbledore told us." "Told you to swear not to tell me?" Harry cut in, not pleased. The joy at seeing his friends was fading. He'd waited a whole month. Now he wanted to be alone. "I think he thought it was best," Hermione said, on the defensive. "Dumbledore probably thought it was safest with Muggles." "Safest with Muggles?" Harry raised an eyebrow. "Really? Which one of you was attacked by Dementors this summer?" "No, that's why he sent members of the Order to watch over you," Ron said. "Doesn't seem to be working very well," Harry replied, feeling cold. "I still have to look out for myself." "There might be another reason," Hermione said after a beat. "He thought John was there too." John, the name that had been muttered downstairs, resurfaced. Harry laughed, exasperated. "John? Protect me?" he scoffed. "At least John is more reliable than some," Hermione offered hesitantly. "John wouldn't hurt you." "You don't know. I haven't been there all summer." Harry stopped. He remembered those black threads that had tried to pull at him, the cold, the claustrophobic sense of something threading into his mind. If Hermione was right, and that magic belonged to John, then John had been working with very dark things. Ron jumped in to diffuse the tension. Dumbledore was furious. He was really angry about Mundungus. "I'd be glad if he left," Harry said flatly. "If he doesn't, I won't use magic. Dumbledore would probably keep me on Privet Drive the whole summer." They were still talking when Sirius returned. Downstairs there had been renewed commotion. Tonks couldn't stop grinning. "What do you mean? Just some muggle," she teased. Sirius's face was grim. Who would have thought a muggle would be so unpredictable and dangerous enough to carry a gun? He'd come back with news. The Star Disciples were a thing. It was worse than any of them had expected. Watson arrived home very late. The next morning, John noticed a dent in the back of his father's car and briefly suspected he'd been driving drunk. "Dad, did you crash the car?" he asked. Watson looked distracted. "Do you know anything about dealing with wizards?" he asked abruptly. John blinked. "Huh?" Why was his father asking this? John shrugged. "Well, you could try to snatch a wizard's wand." No, not that." Watson hesitated, then said, "Is there any way to resist a wizard's magic?" Watson hadn't slept after the previous night. He had emptied his clip and badly wounded the black-haired man. Ever since he'd come home, he'd tossed and turned. Magic felt unfair and terrifying. He was an ordinary man with no means to fight back. How could a muggle protect himself when a single flick of a wand could change everything? Chapter 247. John glanced at him, thinking his father wouldn't be nosing around the equipment in his basement, would he? He answered cautiously, "I do. What do you need it for?" Watson's eyes lit. He was beginning to realize that wizards weren't just kindly old people who turned into mice. Under his father's insistence, John finally showed him the amulet. In the wizarding world, it was the equivalent of a bulletproof vest, able to block most charms. Watson's face brightened. If he'd had something like that yesterday, he wouldn't have been controlled. He sneaked a look into the basement and nearly did a double take. The place was stuffed with enough amulets to kit out an entire squad. John shut the door. He knew his father wouldn't ask that question for no reason. Maybe he'd run into a wizard. Thinking of the magical bodyguards that often accompanied powerful people, John decided it was time to shore up his family's defenses. Diagon Alley, Gringotts. A young man claiming to be the last Lestrange appeared at the bank. The goblin on duty compared the authorization paperwork to the young man's face and narrowed his eyes in suspicion. "This is genuine, is it?" he asked. The young man smiled faintly, checked his pocket watch, and urged, "We don't have all day." Despite his doubts, the contract was in order. The goblin had no choice but to comply and led the man to the Lestrange vault. They passed under a waterfall that washed away magic. The goblin watched closely, but the man remained unaffected. After winding along the rail and through deep vault corridors, they arrived at the door. A chained dragon lay curled there. When the goblin rattled the key, the dragon recoiled instinctively and dared not attack. Beyond the dragon was the vault door, older and more secure than most. The goblin traced his finger along the lock. The mechanisms clicked and the door swung open. As expected from an ancient, pure-blood family, the vault glittered with treasures enough to rival trophies from the silver hand collections. The goblin hovered behind, fawning and respectful. "You may leave," the young man said coolly. The goblin froze, stammered, then backed away. The young man pushed a hand through his greased hair and let his gaze sweep the room. His eyes stopped on a shelf where a sword inlaid with rubies rested. "Gryffindor's sword?" he murmured. He studied it, then shook his head. "A fake, but it could fetch a good price." The young man was John. The waterfall had no effect on mundane makeup, so he'd hired an artist to alter his features subtly. Same face, different aura. Looking at the hoard, he let a small smile curl his lips. "Everything's mine." Chapter 271, Helga Hufflepuff's Cup and a Horcrux. John waited until the goblin had left before he started touching anything. Ancient houses layered their vaults with protections, curses, seals, booby traps. He raised his right hand. The silver ring slid up and covered his arm like a gauntlet. He picked up a silver cup and examined it. "This is enchanted. It will trigger the moment you touch it," he said aloud. He'd anticipated something like that. His pupils narrowed into vertical slits and he traced the magical signatures. Fiendfire and the Gemino charm. He tapped the cup with a finger and watched the magic bleed away like air from a punctured balloon. He set the cup down and continued his sweep. The Lestrange collection was exactly what you'd expect. Glittering chains, gold goblets, silver chalices, crystals, the furs and horns of rare magical beasts. Galleons here were the least interesting thing in the room. John moved through it as if wandering his own warehouse. He paused before a suit of shining goblin-forged armor and stroked his chin. "This is troll-sized, but it'd fit Hagrid nicely." He brushed the silver hand, his artifact, across the armor. The charms winked out. He folded the armor and stashed it in his small satchel. Hagrid in that armor would be a walking, mobile fortress, fun to imagine. He picked up the sword he'd noted earlier and dismantled the enchantments to inspect it. Goblin work, but the details are off. It doesn't have the edge of a true Gryffindor blade. He snapped the blade with a finger. The ring on his finger made it chime dull rather than the clear, sing-song ring of a real magical sword. Mithril, gem set, could sell for 5,000 galleons easy. Another thing went into the satchel. Free loot was free loot. He rifled through the vault and found a number of items that bore the hallmarks of master alchemists, objects with histories that ran centuries deep. Then something smaller caught his eye, a diminutive gold cup, far more delicate and exquisitely made than the rest. The important detail was the crest impressed into it, the badger of Hufflepuff. "Hufflepuff's relic," he said under his breath. He picked it up carefully. Silver hand slid across its rim and he murmured, "No active charm." He studied it closely. What he discovered made his expression go suddenly serious. A Horcrux. He hadn't expected that. He felt a cold thrill. He let his lips curve. "Helga Hufflepuff's Cup. Voldemort, your arrogance goes deep." A memory surfaced. Hogwarts, a history, listing the treasures left by the four founders. Gryffindor's sword, Slytherin's locket, Ravenclaw's diadem, and Helga Hufflepuff's cup. Voldemort had used those relics as Horcruxes. If the cup was one more, then aside from the sword, the rest were indeed corrupted. As he muttered that to himself, a low, sibilant whisper slid into his ear. Parseltongue. The Horcrux tried to speak. John glanced down and, without hesitation, slipped Hufflepuff's cup into his pocket. Then John opened his satchel and went to work. He filled it with everything he could carry. In what felt like minutes, half the vault was empty. What remained were items either worthless to him or things he didn't bother to take. "I have an idea," he said, eyes narrowing as he looked at the untouched side. A cold smile touched his mouth. He summoned the goblin back. The creature who returned gaped at the empty shelves and shrieked. "How could you take so much?" "What? I'm taking my family's galleons. Do I owe you an explanation?" John shot back. A look from him was enough to make the goblin recoil, hunching under an invisible weight. Businessmen disliked goblins for their greed. John used the same sharp economy. He had the vault closed and led the goblin out. As they walked away from Gringotts, John asked, "I forgot. What's your name?" "Griffook, Mr. Lestrange," the goblin said, watching the man who claimed he was a Lestrange walk off. Outside, John removed his disguise and slid his silver mask into place. Today had been a good haul. Lestrange had been generous, and John wasn't one to be stingy in return. "Prepare materials and recruit some alchemists," he told his assistant over the flue. "They don't need to be masters, just competent enough to brew explosives." He smiled faintly. The gift he had in mind for Lestrange would be memorable, perhaps a room full of exploding galleons. Tang Mi, who handled many of his affairs, knew John had plans of his own and didn't press him for details. "Have George and Fred picked a location yet?" she asked, referring to the twins' joke shop. John glanced at her report. The Weasley twins, backed by Silverhand Angel Investment, had found a spot and were preparing to open a shop. "Send a specialist to check it out. They have bold ideas, but after what happened at the World Cup with Ludo, I'm wary." He admired the twins, but this wasn't a charity. Silverhand Angel Investment kept an inspection team. John had paid well to recruit the best. They would score the location against the product's appeal and business risks. After they wrapped up that plan, John asked casually, "Has Mundungus sent the galleons?" Tangmi shook her head. "Not yet. He's borrowed from every wizard he knows. I heard he even hopes to pinch cauldrons." "Foolish man," John sneered. "Tomorrow is his last day. If he can't raise the money, he'll have to repay in other ways." "Tell him not to think of running," Tangmi added. "You'll always find him." John only smiled, the kind that didn't promise mercy. John knew Mundungus couldn't have pulled this off. Ever since he started working for the Silverhand Johnny store, he'd been arrogant and had rubbed nearly everyone the wrong way. No one wanted to owe him anything, and fewer still wanted to cross Johnny Silverhand. He apparated home as the sun was slipping down, a battered little book on the Fidelius charm tucked under his arm. When he reached his doorstep, there were a lot more people than he'd expected. They looked casual enough, but every one of them had a bulging waist, guns. A tall man stepped forward to block him, but a pale, long-haired man cut in and bowed. "Young Master Wick," he said with careful respect. John narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" "We're Mr. Wick's men," the long-haired man said, motioning to the circle of armed figures as if trying not to alarm him. "His subordinates." Subordinates? John's mind flicked to his father's current pretenses. He'd always been so proud. Why would he bring this kind of company home? He pushed open the door and heard raised voices in the living room. His father, Watson, arguing with Mrs. Wick. "How could you promise me that? Are you really going to act like one of those underground bigwigs?" Mrs. Wick demanded. "I didn't want to do it, but that black-haired man might come looking for me again," Watson said, pleading. "That wizard? You surrounded the whole house because of one person?" "I didn't want to, but I was afraid. He could hurt you. He could hurt John." John stood in the entryway and listened. His eyes went cold. A wizard had come after his family. "Who is he?" John's voice was quiet, and something steel-hard ran through it. Watson froze. For a moment he tried to make a joke to break the tension. "John, tell me," he stammered, then blurted, "Grimmauld Place?" That explained the chain of events. Watson had apparently seen a wizard doing something, enough to make him fear that the wizard would come back and try to obliterate his memory with a memory charm. John dug for a name. He'd heard faint clues in the story his father had mumbled. "Who?" John pressed. Watson hesitated, and then, with a voice that trembled a little, said, "According to the black-haired wizard who came later, He called himself Sirius Black. John's mind snapped to attention. Sirius Black, the man who was Harry's godfather, a prominent member of the Order of the Phoenix. If Sirius had personally come after someone, the place at risk had to be important. How on earth had his father escaped from an adult wizard with so much combat experience? Watson added, there was someone else. That black-haired wizard mentioned another, Fingerman Ox. John stared. The coincidence was ridiculous. Fingerman Ox had chased a Death Eater to Grimmauld Place and collided with Sirius, who was apparently trying to erase memories. John felt a sudden admiration for Uxor, whoever he was, then turned to his father with a steadier voice. You always liked Quidditch. How about I build you a Quidditch pitch? Watson looked bewildered. He'd read the Quidditch magazine his son had left at home, but had no idea a full pitch would even fit. Is this wizard very dangerous? Am I going to die? One had to admire Watson's flair for the dramatic. John led him down to the basement, and when Watson came back up, he had several novelty items tucked into his pockets. 3 fake wands, one that produced a squawking chicken, one a rabbit, the last a rubber boat. Amulets clinked around his waist. A new silver-hand novelty, something called a feigning death hanging rope, hung around his neck, promising to suspend a person from the ceiling without actually killing them. A golden snitch toy zipped around his hand before returning. On his head sat a bright red wizard hat with a roaring lion emblem that puffed a tiny fake flame. Watson lumbered into the room like a great, anxious bear. He threw himself against his wife and whimpered, Maybe I'm cursed. Maybe I'll die tomorrow. Mrs. Wick rolled her eyes. Oh, please. John only heard you like these things. Calm down. Watson brightened at once. But he said he's going to get me a life-sized wizard chess set. Mrs. Wick sighed. I'll go ask if your curse is very tricky. After Mrs. Wick checked and confirmed that Watson wasn't dying, merely overeating and overwrought, Watson immediately started negotiating whether the chess set could be made of gold and whether the king could be modeled after him. Meanwhile, in the Order of the Phoenix headquarters, events had been nastier. Sirius had been shot for the first time. Had it not been for his superior wizarding constitution and quick healing, he and 2 others would have been dead. That was patched up with healing spells, and Lupin pressed for details. What about the Star Disciples? Snape's expression tightened. He suspected the Star Disciples might be Johnny Silverhand's people. After the humiliation at Silverhand, Johnny's hands, Snape was eager to know what their purpose was. Sirius was about to answer when Mrs. Weasley's sharp voice cut through the corridor. You lot! Upstairs! The 3 youngsters poked their heads out of the stairwell and were promptly scolded back. Sirius and the others went into the conference room. The door had been magically sealed, so Harry and the rest outside couldn't hear. Inside, almost everyone was present. Dumbledore was the only notable absence. The Star Disciples showed up on the street near Grimmauld Place. Sirius said, face dark. It was Fingerman Ox. He was hunting. I saw a scrap of human skin fall from him. There's a Death Eater nearby. The news hardened faces around the table. Whether it was the Star Disciples or Death Eaters, their presence near Grimmauld Place was bad. We need more hands, Moody said, looking at Arthur Weasley. Mr. Weasley rubbed his glasses and sighed. Percy refuses to join the Order. Sirius arched an eyebrow. Because he got a promotion? No, Mr. Bye, Weasley said warily, because he joined something else, the Constellation Society. Moody snorted. That's no joke. Kingsley spoke in his deep voice. From what I know, the Constellation Society was started by students. Yes, Bill said, but they're talented. Percy thinks it will grow into something important. There's even Fleur. Most of the Order dismissed the Constellation Society as a children's club, despite the obvious talent among its members. Only a few took it seriously. Snape's eyes flickered with a peculiar understanding. He knew, perhaps better than anyone, how formidable John Wick could be. Stories circulated like campfire rumors. First year, he slew a troll. Second year, a basilisk. Third year, he captured Sirius. Fourth year, he somehow split a lake with a single sword. Great people tended to attract other great people. The Constellation Society was full of prodigies. Lupin speculated that John might be involved with Johnny Silverhand. Sirius rubbed the left side of his ribs where his wound still ached and tried to set the topic aside. Mostly they talked about the Star Disciples and the possibility of Death Eaters being too close. If either group discovered the Order's headquarters, that would be disastrous. Don't worry, Tonks tried to lighten the room. We've got the Fidelius charm. Dumbledore is the secret keeper. No one can get in. Her attempt eased some tension, but Sirius still felt raw worry. A muggle had escaped from an incident earlier, and the thought kept niggling at him. His right eyelid kept twitching. The house itself needed attention. Sirius had been living there, but rarely looked after it. He'd practically dumped the place on the Order and left it to rot. As they moved through the house, a barking interrupted them, low, indignant. Indecent fellow, filthy mongrel, disgrace to the family, vile bastard. The portrait of Mrs. Black had been roused and was fulminating as usual, her insults a venomous soundtrack to the scene. Near the stairwell, a large dog, Bodemore in an animagus disguise, was about to squat and relieve himself. Harry and Hermione pushed him away. He's been like this since he woke up this morning, Harry said, trying to hide his disgust. Bill knelt, face suddenly serious. His condition has worsened. It's a dog's curse. He's slipping further into it. He'll gradually become more like a dog. Harry started to answer, about to make some flippant remark, and blurted, I wasn't talking about you, Sirius. He stopped as he realized Sirius was staring at him, an unreadable look on his face. Chapter 249. He had forgotten that his godfather was an animagus dog. Bill tried a counter-curse again, but it had no effect. Bodemore said despondently, Am I going to turn into a dogman like a werewolf? He scratched at his neck, and instinctively trying to use his foot, nearly tore a ligament. He wasn't flexible enough to reach his own neck. The three younger students felt a chill. Hermione whispered, This probably can only be fixed by John. Everyone looked at her. Bill hesitated, then said, Can we ask John Wick? We can't just watch him turn into a dog. Hermione bit her lip. I don't know if John will help. You know how he gets when people offend him. Harry flushed, remembering the last time he'd trampled across John's lawn. Still, all hope rested on Hermione. She sat down, wrote a careful letter, and borrowed Ron's owl, Pigwidgeon, Xiaoju, to deliver it. Pigwidgeon flew out of Grimmauld Place and then stopped, hovering just beyond the garden wall. Outside, John had apparated to Grimmauld Place. He smoothed a lock of black hair that had fallen across his cheek. Maybe it's time for a haircut, he muttered. The hair at the corners of his eyes was annoying him. The street was lined with old, weathered houses. The heavy marks of time showed on their facades. He walked until he reached number 11 and shook his head. The Fidelius charm does its job. An owl appeared from thin air and hovered. John reached out, and the bird landed on his hand. The little envelope tied to its leg carried Hermione's handwriting. He glanced at the direction the owl had come from and felt a small, nagging discord, something off, like dirt in a meal. He started walking again, reading the letter. Someone had been bitten by Tom and had developed a kind of rabies. They hoped John would come. It insisted the victim wasn't a bad person. The wizard who was bitten that day, John read, and a knowing smile crossed his face. Perfect timing. He pressed a thumb to the envelope. Because it had been sent from inside the house, it retained a faint magical connection. John closed his eyes, let a trickle of blood from the owl's talon mingle with those threads, and let the bird's homing instincts mingle with his deductions. He focused on Grimmauld Place, on the image of number 13, and black, arc-shaped light flashed across his vision. Between numbers 11 and 13, a house seemed to squeeze out of nothing, a dark door with a snake-shaped knocker. Pigwidgeon flapped wildly and shot toward the new doorway. Smoke like mist curled from John as the envelope in his hand burst into flame. He reached the door and rang the bell as the paper burned. There was a groan from inside, a complaint. Please stop using the damn doorbell. You know what happens. A young red-haired witch, Tonks, peeked out and then froze. You are? You can let me in first, John said and stepped inside as Tonks moved aside. He had been ready to force the door if no one answered. The portrait of Mrs. Black awakened with a screech. There were murmurs from the meeting. Sirius, already furious at being disturbed, stopped mid-rant when he saw John. John Wick, he demanded, voice carrying through the room. The owl flew back and landed on Ron's shoulder, flapping as if to complain. Pigwidgeon, why are you back so soon? Ron asked, astonished. Hermione's face brightened. Did you deliver my letter to John? The owl lifted a talon, as if accusing John of something. From the meeting room, Sirius barked again. Harry, confused, asked hoarsely, Did I hear that right? Hermione shrieked in delight. John's here. But with the Fidelius charm, he shouldn't be able to come, Harry murmured. Hermione had already bolted downstairs. Harry and Ron followed. Pigwidgeon flew in furious circles, as if chastising its owner for being careless with the delivery. They reached the bottom of the stairs covered with house elf heads and found John standing in the doorway. He was calm, composed, and quietly terrifying. Sirius's expression shifted from anger to alarm. Did someone tell you the address? He asked. The secret keeper here was Dumbledore. Could Dumbledore have revealed it? John's smile was thin. Sirius, we haven't seen each other in a while. Sirius's frown deepened. How do you know me? John's smile faded. My father received a lot of your care. The words fell like a blade. Sirius's face drained of color. John's left hand moved once, and a force slammed into Sirius's chest, propelling him backward. Patterns along his shoes glowed as he skidded. John made a grabbing motion in the air with his right hand, and a silver-veined sword appeared, gleaming cold. He moved with lethal speed. Even Tonks, nearest to him, reacted a beat late. Stop! Someone shouted, and at least 3 wands were raised. Before anyone could fully react, the sword had grazed Sirius's cheek and embedded itself in the wall. John's eyes had a playful, terrible glint. Professor, I didn't expect you to be here too. Figures from the meeting room spilled out. Moody, Lupin, Snape, Mr. Weasley, and a dark-skinned wizard in purple robes. Snape stood without a wand in his hand and asked in a low voice, John, why are you here? John's tone was casual, edged with ice. My father was attacked by 2 wizards here a while ago. I was wondering who had the nerve. He set his foot on Sirius's left ribs, pressing down, the sword still quivering in the wall. Snape's eyes flickered. That muggle who ran away, was he your father? The coincidence hit them all. A muggle had been seen that day by someone in the house. Tonks, who had come out earlier, didn't know Watson Wick. Sirius hadn't realized either, distracted as he'd been. Awkward silence followed. Lupin said quietly, We're sorry. We didn't know he was your father. He was so frightened he wouldn't leave his house for days. He thought he'd been cursed. He thought he was going to die. John's voice was casual, but the silver blade at his back glittered like a promise. An apology won't fix this. Sirius protested, voice high. I'm the one who was harmed. Your father attacked me. John scoffed. Oh, then I'm truly sorry. The tone made it clear it wasn't sincere. All right, John Wick, Moody said gruffly, raising a hand to calm the room. The fact you could get in means Dumbledore trusts you. Did he send you to cure Bode Moore's rabies? John's expression didn't quite fit. That might not be exactly it. He had not been invited by Dumbledore. He'd followed clues and used Hermione's letter as an indirect invitation. Hermione hurried down the stairs and saw John's boot pressed into Sirius's side. John, Sirius, she began. Harry lunged forward, but Ron clamped a hand on his arm. Calm down, Ron hissed. Look at what he's holding. Your head isn't as hard as that thing. Chapter 250, Ron was drenched in sweat. This was a ruthless house, one that had once split the Black Lake with a single sword. Don't be foolish, brother, Sirius snarled. I'm fine, Harry. He roared, disturbing a portrait of his mother that had been hidden behind a curtain. The painted woman spat insults at everyone. Filthy bastard, bringing all sorts of people in, you dirty, lowly mudblood. Anyone who'd spent time in the house had felt the portrait's venom. John frowned, watched the painting, and raised his hand to use a summoning charm. It's useless. There's a permanent sticking charm on it, Sirius said. John didn't bother arguing. He pulled out his wand and triggered a shattering charm. A white flare struck the chattering portrait. The canvas and the wall behind it burst apart, leaving a jagged hole. Everyone stared, stunned and unprepared for such an act. John looked over at Sirius and, as if greeting an old acquaintance, said casually, Hermione, long time no see. Long time, Hermione answered, but she seemed dazed, as if sleepwalking. It was Creature, the house elf, who let out a high, keening shriek. Sirius couldn't quite name what he felt. He'd hated the Black House his whole life, hated its suffocating traditions. He'd run away, been cut from the family tree. Now the portrait of the woman who'd worshipped pure-blood ideology lay in splinters. A sliver of strange sadness touched him, brief, and quickly replaced by something sterner. "Well done," he admitted grudgingly. "I've wanted to do that for a long time." John ignored him. He drew his silver-veined sword with a lazy motion and laid it flat across Sirius's chest. Sirius tried to rise but couldn't overcome the weight. He could only roar. John strolled around the black ancestral home with interest. If it hadn't been neglected for so long, this place might actually be worth something, he remarked. He glanced at the wand still trained on him. "I hate it when people point wands at me," he added with a raised brow. Remus Lupin lowered his wand. Kingsley looked to Moody. When Moody also lowered, Kingsley put his away. The room hummed with a strange energy now that the immediate threat seemed contained. Present were two former Defense Against the Dark Arts professors, the head of house, and the entire Weasley family. "Dumbledore let you come?" Snape demanded, staring at John in disbelief. He couldn't imagine the headmaster sanctioning this. John shrugged, casual as ever. Magic, despite its mysteries, usually has a solution. Sometimes it's just a tiny flaw. As he spoke, he pinched his fingers together to suggest something small. Mr. Weasley, who'd met John a few times and initially assumed he was a friend of his son's, looked favorably on him. "John, have you joined the Order of the Phoenix?" he asked. The Weasley twins had just apparated downstairs, 17 and legally permitted to apparate. John said with a faintly mocking curl in his voice, "No, but people trespassed on my lawn and attacked my father. I thought I'd reason with them. The Order of the Phoenix." From the moment he'd arrived, John had carried himself in a way that made people stop seeing him as a child. Snape's expression hardened at the mention of the Order. "Aren't you going to invite me to sit?" John continued, casual. "After all, you do need something from me, don't you?" Lupin inhaled deeply. "John, it doesn't have to be like this." "If I'm not mistaken," John cut him off, cool and flat, "you're no longer a professor at Hogwarts, and this isn't Hogwarts." Snape bristled at the dismissal. "John Wick, you've certainly changed since school." John skipped twice. "Mr. Snape, I no longer have the identity of your student." The put-down stung. Moody's magical eye rolled in its socket. Dumbledore had mentioned John before. Moody had an impression of him already. "What do you want?" Moody asked. John interlaced his fingers beneath his chin and leaned back. "I can cure Bodemore's illness," he said lightly. "But I don't work for free." Gasps and surprised looks spread through the room. Mrs. Weasley, still in a cleaning apron and clutching a spray for flobberworm repellent, stared at him as if she couldn't believe that this was Ron's peer. Snape bristled at the audacity. "You expect payment?" John mused, then clapped his hands. "I'm very interested in the Black family's collection." Lupin's face went grave. "We can't hand that over. That would be Sirius's decision." "Give it to him." Sirius's voice echoed from the doorway. The twins tried to tug at John's sword by magic, but failed. Sirius looked unconcerned. "I was going to throw it away anyway. If the Black ancestors could have seen him, they would have cursed the prodigal son." John snapped his fingers. "Straightforward, but how do you intend to resolve your breaking onto my property and attacking my father?" Moody's patience, always thin, snapped. "How do you want us to resolve it?" "Simple." John's expression turned hard. He pointed to the door. "I want one of his hands." The room dropped into a stunned silence. Mrs. Weasley's hand went to her mouth. No one could believe what they'd heard. Lupin hesitated, then said gravely, "John, that's not funny." "I'm not joking," John replied coldly. "Attacking my family is not a trivial thing." They were silent. John stood and walked out. Harry, who'd been watching from nearby, burst out, "You can't do that! You can't cut off Sirius's hand!" John's patience frayed. He grabbed Harry by the front of his robes, hauling him close, and looked straight into those familiar green eyes. "Harry," he said, each word deliberate, "if your family were caught in an unprovoked disaster, do you think you could still make sarcastic remarks?" It was the roughest he'd ever spoken to Harry. Around them, several wands went taut with attention. For an instant, it looked as if John was the villain, the kind of person the Order trained against. But John had calculated this. The Order's greatest weakness was mercy. Ron protested loudly. "Sirius didn't mean harm. He was trying to erase memories. Mr. Wick won't mind." "Don't use your wizarding mindset to excuse what happened to my father," John snapped, sweeping Ron with a hard look. "He's a muggle. If your memories were erased one day, you'd know it isn't ordinary." He pushed Harry away and addressed the gathered wizards. "If you mean to stop me, do it now." His wand had slipped into his left hand without anyone noticing. "Be prepared. I will have no more qualms." The room froze. John wasn't a Death Eater. Had a Death Eater made the threat, they'd already be disarmed and on the floor. To John, the Order's pity was a weakness that needed testing. He was probing their limits. If they were indifferent to the loss of a hand, if they would accept it as collateral, then to him they were too weak to matter. Snape understood the line John had crossed for the first time. Sirius bellowed, "Give him my hand!" "You still look like a godfather," John said, lifting his hand. The silver-veined sword leapt into his right grip. "Close your eyes," he told Sirius, voice cold. "It won't hurt as much as you think." "John," Hermione stepped forward, pleading, tears at the edge of her voice. "We're sorry. There doesn't need to be blood." Hermione's voice touched something in John. "Hermione, you and I are the same," he said softly, for the first time allowing a bit of warmth. "Our parents aren't wizards. They're fragile." She had no reply. Nobody could imagine seeing their parent harmed like that. Sirius steeled himself and extended his left hand. A silver flash leapt toward it, then stopped midair. Lupin sighed and stepped forward. "We apologize," he said quietly to John. "We will make amends. The Order of the Phoenix owes you a favor." "We don't have to be enemies," Remus added. The promise hung in the air, the Order's bottom line. If they pushed, they'd become the enemy. John's sword hovered a heartbeat longer, then he let it lower. "Remember your words, Remus," John said simply. Everyone exhaled, as though a storm had passed. John had gotten what he wanted, a formal promise of a favor from the Order. He had tested them and forced them to choose. As if nothing had happened, he said, standing fully composed. "All right, where's that unlucky fellow?" He had what he came for. With the Order's pledge, many future obstacles would be far easier to remove. Unfortunate Bode Moore was brought in, and John only glanced at him before pulling a potion from his robes and sprinkling it on the wound. Bode Moore screamed in pain, and the curse was lifted. He still refused to turn into a dog. John closed the Black family book he'd taken from their collection, shouldered it, and headed for the door. To Hermione, he said, "See you next school year." He looked like any other student as he left. The moment the door opened, a familiar figure barreled in. "Sirius, you must save me." Mundungus flung himself at Sirius's legs, wailing and clinging to him. Sirius, already tense, felt his veins stand out. "If I don't pay up, they'll butcher me. Lend me some. You're so rich." Mundungus's eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept in days. John watched the whole scene, cataloging details. Mundungus had gone to the Order of the Phoenix to beg for money. He didn't recognize who had passed him on the way out. After Mundungus left, the house behind him folded back into the junction of numbers 11 and 13. Probably impossible to get in again, John thought, but his lips curved slightly as he fingered the black-covered book. Finding it had been a fluke. Secrets of Advanced Dark Arts. Malfoy Manor welcomed uninvited guests. Early morning mist made the old house even more ominous. Draco stood nearby, seeing the visitor for the first time. The man's face was snake-like and menacing. Lucius Malfoy, forcing a smile, fawned. "Master, yes, this is my son." Lucius had used the decade since Voldemort's fall to position himself carefully, and his fear of the present presence broke through. Inside the manor, the Death Eaters had gathered. Lord Voldemort sat in the chief chair while 3 Death Eaters knelt before him, shaking with terror. "If not for my loyal Death Eater Lucius, I might not have a place to return to at all." Voldemort's eyes were cold and venomous. He had been wandering in exile for months, finally finding someone whose loyalty he could taste, Lucius Malfoy. He turned his attention to the 3 kneeling figures. "Tell me, why did you abandon your master?" Fear made them stammer. John would later recognize these 3 as people who had been summoned by Silverhand Johnny. They trembled and explained, "Master, we were tracking traitors among the Death Eaters." Traitors? Voldemort's laugh was the sound of something dangerous breaking. Narcissa clutched Draco's hand, warning him silently not to move. The other Death Eaters were all hushed, having answered Lucius's summons. Voldemort's amusement faded to cold fury. "Then why did you not come when I called you?" "We have been tricked," one whispered. "Someone used the dark mark to lure Death Eaters away and capture them. We've fallen for it before." They had been fooled too often. People used the dark mark as a trap, and no one dared respond without caution. Someone is gathering Death Eaters to his banner. Many among us are turning traitor, another added. Voldemort, who could probe minds with legitimacy, grew livid at such excuses. He used Crucio on one of them, listening to the screams, and spat, "Idiots! I can sense who is loyal and who is not." He had been set adrift by false summonses for months. Lucius's loyalty, in contrast, had been a lifeline that helped restore the Dark Lord's dignity. His gaze softened as he regarded Lucius. Lucius prepared for my return while I was away. Lucius had quietly gathered Death Eaters at Malfoy Manor and performed services for Voldemort that were not insignificant. He knelt, filled with shame. "Master, I regret I could not save your loyal servants." Voldemort, for a rare moment, helped him up and allowed a small flicker of approval. "What happened to Barty Crouch Jr. was not your fault. Your ability to break into that place for me surprises me, Lucius." Since Voldemort's return, he had already lost 3 loyal followers. He seldom rewarded Lucius, but this time his appreciation swept over other minor Death Eaters, Rippy and Bieber, and they bowed fanatically. Voldemort appeared to praise Lucius, though he was also probing subtly with legitimacy to be sure of the man's loyalty. He detected fear, but no betrayal, and that was enough. Draco watched, rage coiling in him at the sight of his father and the man who had killed his friend together. Narcissa gently pulled Draco away toward his room. John's plan had been in motion for some time. It had been a while since he left the Order of the Phoenix. Tomorrow was Harry's trial, and he watched the news of Lucius's contact with Voldemort with satisfying calm. He tapped his badge and messaged Draco, "Don't be impulsive. Don't resist. Avoid meeting Voldemort. I'll explain everything when you're back at school." Lucius's meeting with Voldemort was not an accident. John had engineered it. Rather than letting Voldemort lurk in the shadows, John preferred to have him operating where he could be watched. He had sown distrust among the Death Eaters by planting spies and by repeatedly using the Dark Mark as bait so that no one would respond en masse. Lucius, seizing the chance, gathered their forces at Malfoy Manor, and Voldemort, who would not abandon those loyal to him, came. To make the plan secure, John had cut off direct contact with Lucius. No one could learn occlumency in months to resist Voldemort's probes, so Lucius had voluntarily had his memories sealed. He remembered nothing of his previous alliance. The current Lucius believed himself the old Death Eater once again. Only when he encountered John would those memories return. John smiled at the irony, the greatness of paternal love. He knew Lucius did not want Draco to follow in his footsteps. The only way to clear everything was to remove Lord Voldemort from the equation entirely. Back in the basement, John studied a single fresh drop of blood he'd taken from the silver-veined sword, Sirius Black's blood. Pointing his wand, he concentrated until the blood bead shimmered and transformed into an exquisite, silvery pendant. With it, he could locate the Order of the Phoenix. It was a key to their door. He had both factions in play, the Death Eaters at Malfoy Manor, and with this pendant, the Order could be found. He considered alternative ways of controlling the Order. He could have prompted Percy to join them, but he refused to drag family into the conflict with Dumbledore. That fight shouldn't be Percy's burden. Pity about that Dementor on Privet Drive, he mused aloud, hanging the pendant around his neck. Voldemort had likely made contact with the Dementors. They were crucial and could threaten Death Eaters imprisoned in Azkaban. John twirled his wand once, thinking aloud, "In that case, let's turn all the Dementors into materials." Replacing the Dementors had been part of Old Barty's plan, but John wanted more. He needed a credible pretext to expel the Dementors entirely from the Ministry's control, not merely replace them. Entities that could switch allegiance at a moment's notice had no place in the Ministry. If he could manufacture a serious enough incident, the Dementors could be banished from official duty and transferred into a secure new prison of his making. He sent Riddle, his black long-eared owl, off with a letter to Old Barty and put his wand away. Then he called Tang Mi. "I need a new outfit," he said. Tang Mi asked if it was for a banquet. "No," John replied, smiling. "I'm going to the Ministry of Magic." He was looking forward to Harry's trial, to the moment Dumbledore would argue below for him. Tang Mi found a tailor from the Silver Hand line who could rush a suit. They designed a new robe with green and purple accents, tailored, form-fitting, with gold watch chain details. John felt ready. John slid the ring onto his left hand, rubbed it with his right, and smiled as he studied his reflection. Let's go to the Ministry of Magic. With a silver mask across his face, John snapped his fingers. Green flames leapt up the fireplace, and he and Tang Mi stepped through. Chapter 276, The Ministry of Magic and the Hearing. When they emerged, they were in the Ministry of Magic's foyer. The dark wooden floor gleamed like a mirror. The peacock blue ceiling was inset with shifting golden symbols that sparkled and moved. All four walls were paneled in glossy dark wood, each containing a gilded fireplace. John had come out of one of those very fireplaces. He'd activated a flue connection to the ministry, arranged with old Barty's help. In the center of the foyer was a fountain ringed with pure gold statues, the Fountain of Magical Brethren. A handsome wizard and a beautiful witch stood admiringly beside a centaur, a goblin, and a house elf, all looking up at them. In John's opinion, the ministry wasted a lot on appearances. No matter how ornate the decorations, without real power behind them, they were just decoration. Perhaps the statues were meant to commemorate hard-won victories, but apart from the house elf, the centaur and the goblin still seemed unconvinced by the ministry, especially the centaur, who hadn't even visited the building. The goblin, of course, controlled the magical world's finances. Mr. Silverhand. A security wizard was waiting, smiling. Eric, who usually looked like he was attending a funeral, was unusually upbeat today. John guessed why. Eric had been given money by Johnny Silverhand to replace his old Comet racing broom. "Do you need me to check your wand?" Eric asked politely. John casually pulled out his wand. Eric waved him off. "No need, Mr. Silverhand. Minister Crouch is waiting for you in his office." "Thank you." John nodded and led Tang Mi through the gilded doors. Eric watched them go, and once they'd passed, his smile slipped away. He returned to his usual solemn posture. "I brought a guest," John said as they entered. A voice called, and Eric, already half asleep, glanced up as Mr. Weasley arrived with Harry. "Come over here," Eric mumbled without enthusiasm. There was no special cheer even for Harry Potter. The savior hadn't bought Eric a Nimbus 2000 after all. Eric made Harry produce his wand, and then took it with the sluggish speed of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Beyond the golden doors lay a smaller hall with at least 20 lifts. Every wizard John passed greeted him with "Sir." Some of Tang Mi's former colleagues couldn't hide their envy. Though Tang Mi no longer worked at the ministry, his current status was higher than theirs. "Sir, please go first," someone said, and a lift arrived. A large, bearded wizard carrying a cardboard box stopped to let John through. The others, smiling, indicated they weren't in a hurry and that John should step in. "Thank you, Bob," John said. Bob beamed. He was delighted that Mr. Silverhand had remembered his name. The last person whose name had been remembered had been Oz Hyld, now a candidate for head of the Auror office. Bob's grin was so wide, he looked positively giddy. The golden grill closed, and the lift rose. "They're certainly enthusiastic, aren't they, Tang Mi?" John said. Even at busy times, the lift carried only a few people. Tang Mi smiled and shrugged. "I've never seen Eric smile like that. At work, he generally looks as if he's going to a funeral." "Power and money do that," John said, rubbing the ring as the lift reached the 7th floor, the Department of Magical Games and Sports, run by Ludo. John asked casually, "How much does Ludo still owe?" Tang Mi's memory was sharp. "You agreed to waive 10% at the last vote. He still owes about 5 to 400 galleons. He should clear it by next year." People outside an arriving lift stopped to let John pass, apologizing as they moved aside. The lift climbed to the 6th floor, the Department of Magical Transportation. On the 5th floor, John met Percy, now head of the International Magical Law Office, stepping in with a stack of documents. "I've moved out," Percy complained. "My father thinks I'm too petty." "That's for the best. Less awkward, right?" John chuckled. "Mr. Weasley can't dictate your life." "I suppose," Percy said, a touch of annoyance in his voice. At the 4th floor was the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Percy had to handle an illegal import case. The lift continued past the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes on the 3rd floor, and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement on the second. They reached their destination, the minister's office on the first floor. Old Barty sat at his desk, reading documents, his brow growing more furrowed by the minute. "I hope I haven't disturbed you," John said, smiling as he entered. Old Barty's stern face softened into a grin as he stood to shake John's hand. "Not at all, Mr. Silverhand." John glanced at the papers on the desk, reports concerning Dumbledore and a Dementor at Azkaban. "Dumbledore is the chief warlock of the Wizengamot," John observed. "That post limits what the Ministry can do." Old Barty invited John to sit. His hair was a little whiter than John remembered. "He told me the Ministry has no right to interfere in Hogwarts affairs," Old Barty said with obvious irritation. John toyed with the ring and watched Old Barty, then said pointedly, "That's exactly why you need to restrict him, Old Barty." Old Barty had seen Dumbledore act like an emeritus emperor of the Ministry, and he, the new minister, resented it. Glancing at his watch, Old Barty said, "I suppose you won't mind coming down with me." "Of course not." John rose with a light laugh. "It's my pleasure." Old Barty felt more confident facing Dumbledore with this second king at his side. They took the lift down. As the second basement floor flashed by, John raised an eyebrow. "You moved locations?" Old Barty's voice hardened. "To receive our savior and first king, it ought to be somewhere more appropriate." Old Barty disliked rule breakers, and Harry Potter had never been one to follow the rules. "He causes trouble almost every year," Old Barty grumbled. Since enrolling at Hogwarts, Harry had indeed caused an incident annually. One of those incidents had even publicly embarrassed the Ministry. Old Barty still nursed a grudge. During Voldemort's rise, Old Barty had overseen the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He'd authorized Aurors to use unforgivable curses against Death Eaters with an iron fist. He believed his contributions had been significant, if not as singular as Dumbledore's, and resentful that people remembered the Savior while forgetting him. If not for John's influence, Old Barty might still be consigned to obscurity. This relocation was meant to remind people of Old Barty's role in those courtroom battles, and of who had led the Ministry then. The lift descended to the 9th basement, the most secretive level in the Ministry. John stepped out and stared at the black door at the corridor's end, a strange light in his eyes. The Department of Mysteries. Old Barty turned toward a nearby staircase. "This way, sir," he said. "Oh, this is my first time here," John said casually, but he studied the black door intently. Whatever he wanted lay behind it, but the timing wasn't right yet. Even Old Barty couldn't just move things from inside easily. They followed the stairwell down. The rough torchlit walls felt oddly like the corridor to potions class, and soon they reached courtroom 10. They pushed the door open. "Ah, Minister Crouch and Mr. Silverhand." The courtroom and the trial. The high, girlish voice made John shiver. The speaker wore a red robe with a pink collar peeking out, and her broad, flabby face contrasted absurdly with the deliberately juvenile lilt of her voice. The sight and the sound hit John hard. Dolores Umbridge's face registered surprise as she looked up and saw Johnny Silverhand enter. Chapter 253. "Mr. Silverhand, I believe this is our first formal meeting." She giggled and offered her hand. "Dolores Jane Umbridge." John wanted to turn and leave, but thinking of getting Umbridge to take the blame, he briefly touched her hand and immediately withdrew it, saying coolly, "You sent me a letter." "I saw it." Umbridge smiled, pleased. Old Barty wore a maroon robe with an exquisite silver d'Aubonne embroidered over his left chest, the same robe worn by the other members of the Wizengamot. John stood out. His purple robe was different from the rest, and the silver mask he wore set murmurs rippling through the room. Amelia, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was also present. She frowned. "Johnny Silverhand, you are not a member of the Wizengamot." Old Barty spoke up. "Mr. Silverhand was invited by me. He is here as a ministry consultant." "With all due respect," Amelia replied, "I've never heard of a ministry consultant." "There's one now. Mr. Silverhand has given us many leads on Death Eaters. That should make things clear." Old Barty cut Amelia off, his tone sharp. The fact that he had rounded up a number of Death Eaters had bolstered public confidence in him. If the information had come from Johnny, the presence of a ministry consultant was more plausible. Amelia glanced at the silver mask and fell silent. The other members quieted, some smiling politely at John. The courtroom was carved from dark stone. In the center stood the high chair with iron chains along its armrests. About 50 people sat on rising benches. "Mr. Silverhand, if you don't mind, you may sit here," a voice offered. Damo Alex, also a member of the Wizengamot, had a seat. John went to sit beside him. His voice was low and hoarse. "Still very interested in the Savior, I see." Damo, in a red robe and leaning on a staff, smiled. "The only person to survive the Dark Lord's Avada Kedavra. It's hard not to be." John was non-committal. "How's your blood curse thesis coming along?" "It's under review. I used your real name. You don't need too much glory at the moment." Damo kept his voice low. John didn't mind the use of his given name. A few moments later, someone entered the dim chamber. Damo fell silent and his face lit with excitement. Harry Potter. The lighting was poor, and John was seated up high. Harry did not see him. Harry's steps were heavy despite Hermione and Mr. Weasley's assurances that the ministry wouldn't convict him, that he'd acted in self-defense. This place still made his legs tremble. He had seen it before in the headmaster's pensieve, how old Barty had sat in that very chair, hammer in hand, sending Death Eaters one by one into Azkaban. Now Harry would sit where they had sat. Under the Wizengamot's silent stare, the pressure tightened. "Harry James Potter," old Barty began, "take your seat." "I assume the Wizengamot has informed you where to sit," old Barty continued. "Yes, sir." Harry was only 15. He lowered his gaze and walked with loud, measured steps. He perched on the chair, the chains clinking, but he was not bound to them. A wave of dizziness tried to sweep him. He forced himself to be steady and looked up. The dimness made some faces shadowed and inscrutable, which only added to his unease. Old Barty sat in the center, flanked by Amelia and an elderly-looking woman. Harry saw Percy, rumored to be at odds with Mr. Weasley, there as recorder. Old Barty was clearly laying claim to his position on the Wizengamot. Harry tried to catch Percy's eye. Percy was the only familiar face, but Percy didn't even glance at him. Percy was rational, but still bitter over the Heinrich matter. "The hearing of August 12th, old Barty's voice rang out, concerning Harry James Potter, of number 4, Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey, on charges of violating the Reasonable Restriction of Underage Sorcery Act and the International Statute of Secrecy. Interrogators: Minister of Magic Barty Crouch, Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement Amelia Susan Bones, Senior Undersecretary Dolores Jane Umbridge, Trial Recorder Percy Ignatius Weasley." When old Barty finished, Dumbledore walked forward calmly. Witness for the defense, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. In a dark blue robe and with his usual serene expression, Dumbledore moved to Harry's side. Old Barty eyed him and said, "We need a comfortable chair." "No trouble at all." Dumbledore flicked his wand. A soft armchair materialized, and he sat, glancing toward the side where the silver mask watched. Seeing Dumbledore bring his own chair, old Barty resumed. He unfolded a sheet and read aloud. "The defendant is accused as follows. The defendant previously received a written warning from the ministry for a similar offense. Fully aware his actions were illegal, on August 2nd at 9:23 p.m. in a Muggle dwelling, he conjured a Patronus charm in the presence of Muggles. This is a violation of Article 3 of the Reasonable Restriction of Underage Sorcery Act of 1875 and Article 13 of the International Confederation of Wizards Statute of Secrecy. Are you Harry James Potter of number 4, Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey?" old Barty asked. "Yes." 3 years ago, were you formally warned by the Ministry for Illegal Magic?" "Yes, but that was because of a house elf," Harry protested. Old Barty fixed him with a stare. "Then why did you inflate a Muggle 2 years ago?" "That was because. Harry began, thinking of the story Minister Fudge had laughed over in Harry's 3rd year, about the ministry sending a young wizard to Azkaban for inflating his aunt. Old Barty cut in. "Have you had other such incidents?" Harry thought of the time before Hogwarts, at the reptile house when the glass vanished and the boa constrictor escaped. "This is dangerous behavior," old Barty's voice thumped. "This is your 3rd breach of ministry regulations." His interrogation experience was relentless. "You know you're not yet 17, and you may not use magic outside school. You were in a densely populated Muggle area at the time, using magic in front of Muggles." "Yes, because," before Harry could finish, Amelia spoke. "You conjured a full Patronus?" "Yes." A corporeal Patronus, a clear form, not just a wisp? Yes, Harry said, bewildered. It's a stag. Every time. Every time? Amelia said. Old Barty impatiently interrupted her. We need to interrogate. Amelia's tone shifted. Admiration crept in. That's extraordinary. For him to produce a true Patronus at his age is very impressive. The sudden praise left Harry bewildered. Old Barty scowled at Amelia's attempt to generate goodwill for the defendant. You might point to another student at Hogwarts who repelled 100 Dementors in his 3rd year. What matters here is his use of magic in front of Muggles. Amelia fell silent. Harry, pushed to the edge by their contradictory tones, blurted, It was because of Dementors. Dementors. Old Barty sat forward. Explain. 2 Dementors appeared in the alley. They came straight at me and my cousin. That's a grave accusation, Old Barty snapped. Do you understand what you're claiming? A murmur ran through the Wizengamot. Aside from John, the members whispered among themselves, shocked that Dementors had been in a Muggle area. I know, Harry said. There were 2 of them, blocking the alley from both ends. It was cold and dark. My cousin fell. He dropped his wand. The other Dementor had him tangled, and the boy tried to pick up his wand to fight back. Old Barty considered the implications. Dumbledore cleared his throat. The chamber quieted, hanging on him like followers waiting for guidance. We have a witness who can corroborate Dementors were in the alley, he said. A witness other than Dudley Dursley. You have that right, Old Barty answered. Bring your witness. Dumbledore nodded. She's just outside the door. Mrs. Arabella Figg was called in. She was a squib and had never been in a place like this. Dumbledore conjured a chair for her. Old Barty asked. Arabella Doreen Figg, she answered, voice trembling. Old Barty motioned for her to continue. Mrs. Figg described the Dementors in the alley in painstaking detail. When asked what they did, she grew steadier. They lunged at the 2 boys. One boy fell, and the other dropped his wand and tried to pick it up, but a Dementor had him entangled. Something black appeared and took the Dementor off the fallen boy, Mrs. Figg continued. The other boy seized the moment to use a Patronus. Old Barty's sharp eyes narrowed. What was the black thing you said? Mrs. Figg looked frightened and confused. I don't know. It was like a black thread. It wrapped around the Dementor, and the Dementor seemed terrified. Chapter 254. He was helping Harry Potter, wasn't he? Old Barty said. The unknown black, he was interfering. I think so, Mrs. Figg nodded. From what they knew, the black figure had not attacked Harry. It had only taken the Dementor away. Old Barty fixed Harry with a hard look. You used the Patronus charm right before you were rescued? No, that black thing felt wrong. Harry started to explain, but Old Barty cut him off. Do you think that made you stand out more? Minister Crouch, Dumbledore said softly. I don't think the Dementor's appearance there was a coincidence. Excuse me, Old Barty snapped. What we are discussing now is why Harry Potter still chose to use magic when he was about to be out of danger. He raised his voice. As for the Dementor, I will investigate that later. Turning to Harry, he said sharply, This isn't the first time, is it? Dumbledore frowned. Old Barty knew about Lord Voldemort. Why push like this now? Staring at Harry, Old Barty continued, I don't understand why your predecessor, Minister Fudge, let a young wizard who made such a serious mistake off so lightly. In my opinion, losing control and harming a Muggle is an extremely dangerous thing, he added, addressing Dumbledore as if Dumbledore were a witness. Do you agree? Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. He understood Old Barty's meaning. This was not merely about Harry. It was a rebuke. As Chief Wizard of the Wizengamot, Dumbledore said slowly, you ought to know that continuing to use magic after the source of danger has been removed is precisely the kind of thing Article 7 of the Restriction of Underage Magic Act was written to prevent. Old Barty, formerly head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was well versed in such matters. His appeal to Dumbledore's public positions was a pointed reminder of authority, a hint Dumbledore took in. Perhaps you have forgotten what those offices mean, forgotten some responsibilities, Dumbledore replied calmly. Amelia, sitting beside Old Barty, looked at him in disbelief. Is that so? She murmured. Perhaps I am no longer suited to continue in this position, Dumbledore added quietly. Old Barty allowed a momentary slight smile before it vanished. "Do not drag unrelated matters into this hearing," he said earnestly. Harry stared, incredulous. In his mind, Dumbledore had always seemed infallible. Yet now the headmaster was on the defensive. "With respect," Dumbledore continued, "Harry Potter was not entirely out of danger. That black figure, after taking the Dementor away, did not appear to have any intention of helping Harry." "That's only conjecture," old Barty shot back. "Your witness already gave testimony to the contrary." "I have other proof." Dumbledore did not look at old Barty, but toward the back of the chamber. "Perhaps I can have that person come forward to confirm it." John felt the gaze and knew Dumbledore was looking at him. He remained where he was, expression unreadable beneath the silver mask, only the corner of his mouth twitching. He could help, if he wanted, but he did not move. Dumbledore's plea went unanswered. Old Barty's face darkened. "You mean you know that person?" "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I can confirm that he had no intention of continuing to act at that time." "That's your inference." Old Barty set the papers down and mocked him. "You could even change certain laws. You once had that power." "I'll accept your nitpicking for now," Dumbledore answered, "but I do not wish to dwell on the mistakes of a previous minister regarding Harry Potter's actions outside of school." Old Barty clasped his hands and addressed the Wizengamot. "Those who agree that the charge is not established, please raise your hand." Many hands went up, partly because of Dumbledore's influence, partly persuasion. Half the chamber voted not established, including Amelia and several of Dumbledore's allies. Harry felt a flicker of hope. "Those who agree that the charge is established, please raise your hand." Old Barty raised his own hand. Other hands followed, bringing the tally to the other half. A stalemate. All eyes turned to John. He had not raised his hand. "Ministry of Magic Advisor, you may participate," Old Barty said, his tone less rigid. "I don't believe he has that qualification," Amelia interrupted. "He's only an advisor, not a member of the Wizengamot." "We're at an impasse," Old Barty said coldly. "Do you want a second trial?" Harry did not want another trial. Dumbledore stepped forward. "I think it's fair to allow the ministry advisor to participate." That shut down Amelia's objection. Dumbledore's tone changed when he addressed the silver-masked man. There was something like recognition and even warmth in his eyes. "I did not expect to meet you here, Mr. Johnny Silverhand." "Headmaster Dumbledore." John stood and inclined his head. "There are many things you did not expect. You are not a god. You cannot control everything, can you?" He had a point. Under everyone's gaze, John spoke softly, getting to the heart of it. As a student at Hogwarts, why can he not even control basic magic and avoid harming a muggle? John looked at Dumbledore directly. "The wizarding world invests heavily in Hogwarts. It does not want young wizards to come out of school unable to control their magic. I hope the ministry will supervise educational standards at Hogwarts." Months later, Slytherin's dragon will bear its fangs at Hogwarts Phoenix. Old Barty's expression shifted. He understood the thrust of John's remark. The words from behind the silver mask sounded conciliatory and sincere, but they cut like venom. "I have no personal grudge against Harry Potter," John went on. "I am inclined to give young wizards a chance to reform. I vote that the charge is not established, but I strongly recommend the ministry immediately implement supervision of Hogwarts' education, Headmaster Dumbledore." It was clear what he meant. Dumbledore should be held accountable. John sat down, his cold eyes fixed on Dumbledore, and Dumbledore felt the chill. The vote concluded. Harry was found innocent, but with conditions. Dumbledore's position as headmaster was suspended pending a senior investigator's review of Hogwarts to determine whether there were educational failings. His role as chief wizard of the Wizengamot was revoked, and his presidency of the International Confederation of Wizards was called into question. Harry felt no triumph, only guilt. He had dragged Dumbledore down and cost him so much. Dumbledore attempted to console him with an awkward joke. "As long as they don't take me off the chocolate frog cards, I shan't mind," he said. Harry was not reassured. Old Barty's trial and that silver mask churned through his thoughts. Later, outside the courtroom, "Harry, go with Arthur first," Dumbledore said. "But I still have things to resolve." Harry left the room and glanced back at Dumbledore. The headmaster winked at him, as he always did. Mr. Weasley waited anxiously nearby, desperate to know the outcome. John stayed behind. Old Barty gave him a slight nod and then left. That boy disappointed me somewhat, Damo Alex said with a shake of the head. He had expected the legendary savior to be different. Now he seemed like any ordinary 15-year-old. The two of them walked toward the door together. "Mr. Johnny Silverhand, may I speak with you?" Dumbledore asked. Damo Alex excused himself and left. The others filed out. Even Amelia slowed as she passed, then hurried away. Two men remained in the quiet courtroom, John and Dumbledore. "Perhaps this will make you feel better," Dumbledore said, offering his usual benign expression. "I am sorry about what happened." John said nothing. Dumbledore continued, "I know you're preparing to deal with the Death Eaters, and that some of your methods are extreme. I hope we can sit and talk." With a small flourish, two soft chairs appeared. Dumbledore looked at John, inviting him. John ran a hand over the arm of the nearby chair, feeling its smooth surface. "Do you know, Dumbledore?" John said quietly, fingers tracing the fabric. "I've been thinking these past few days. Who exactly is Dumbledore?" He lifted his head slowly. "The headmaster of Hogwarts?" "No." His voice was flat. "Dumbledore is a god." He fixed Dumbledore with an unreadable look. "He controls everything, so he should fix everything. He is merciful, compassionate, saint-like, a god." Where his fingertips had brushed the chair, flames suddenly sparked. The fabric caught fire. The flames swallowed half the silver mask's reflection in the air, and John's voice turned cold and emotionless. "We're supposed to be like that, adoring Dumbledore, following him." "John," Dumbledore was startled, "but the god grows old." John's voice sharpened. "When a god bleeds, the Godslayer appears." The fire flared. John tore into his indictment with a calm, devastating clarity. "You call yourself a leader, but your school lacks basic internal training. This isn't mere temper. Your system leaves students without essential self-preservation skills. If you are a god, you must be fair to all. You have failed in that. Do you know what's pathetic? You have the power of a god, but the heart of a man. You try to hide your flaws and in doing so encourage them. You could have led the ministry to defeat Voldemort with fewer casualties. Instead, you built your own team and invited unnecessary tragedies. You evade your faults, yet you cannot let go." The chair turned to blackened ash. The pungent smell of burning filled the room. Chapter 255. "You're talking about it," Johnny Silverhand said as he walked past the chair. He glanced at the man who wanted to escape his burdens, yet could not bear to abandon them all. Dumbledore's failures, Johnny thought, had always sprung from that evasion. It had been true then, and it was true now. His leniency toward Voldemort came partly from pity and partly from an arrogance born of believing his own power could contain any corruption. Was Voldemort hard to deal with? No, he simply required someone sufficiently powerful to confront him, someone who could take the reins of the ministry. Dumbledore had been the obvious choice. His strength had been proven during the Grindelwald years. The ministry had even once invited him to be minister. But Dumbledore had feared corruption. He refused the office and instead formed the Order of the Phoenix. In doing so, he allowed Voldemort's movement to grow. Pure-blood families rallied to the Death Eaters. The wizarding world fractured, and Muggles suffered. At the time, the ministry teemed with experienced Aurors. The Longbottoms and others came from those ranks. But Dumbledore chose to rely on newly graduated friends like James Potter, rather than the ministry's institutions. Dumbledore's mistakes extended into education. Knowing that Voldemort had not been entirely eliminated, he adopted a hands-off approach to defense against the dark arts. Each new professor restarted the curriculum. Students' learning became inconsistent. If not for groups like the Constellation Society and the Golden Trio, Johnny dared say this generation might have been the weakest Hogwarts ever produced. Benevolence misplaced becomes arrogance. Your failure is born of your contradictions, Johnny told him. A god should remain on the altar, he added, and walked on. He brushed past Dumbledore, leaving the headmaster rooted in place, unable to recover. Johnny passed the black door of the Department of Mysteries, paused to look at it, then turned and stepped into the elevator. "I will make the god shed the first drop of blood," he muttered to himself. Old Barty Crouch was in a rare good mood. Harry Potter had not been convicted, and that outcome served several purposes. It gave Dumbledore a measure of face, it limited his powers, and it sent a message. Dumbledore was still the most powerful wizard in Britain, but the crown of his white magic had been trimmed. As for the investigator to send to Hogwarts, Barty said eagerly, looking at Johnny, Mr. Silverhand, who do you think we should appoint? You're the minister, Barty, Johnny replied with a smile. But I have a suggestion. Dolores Umbridge. Her. Barty frowned. She was on Fudge's side once. We need someone who will counterbalance Dumbledore. He's only suspended, not resigned, Johnny said lightly. This is not a delicate job. Barty nodded. To balance Dumbledore, they needed someone unafraid of him. Umbridge fit, or at least the willfully ignorant did. Barty approved at once. Johnny added another name. Oz Hyld. To reform education, we must strengthen it, Johnny said. We should show the Ministry's determination to fix matters at Hogwarts. Umbridge could manage people, perhaps, but she was no teacher. Oz Heald, on the other hand, could help restore standards. Barty agreed. If the Ministry could improve instruction, pupils might be steered toward careers that supported the state. Interfering in Hogwarts' education was risky. The wrong minister could turn the school into a breeding ground for factionalism, but they did not seek to control Hogwarts so much as to unbalance Dumbledore. The three pillars, Dumbledore, the Hogwarts governors, and the Ministry, must check one another. Barty only sought to cut some of Dumbledore's privileges, not to make him an outright enemy. He and Johnny wanted one thing. Either Dumbledore would be accepted as a god in every sense, or he would be decisively human, stripped of divine privilege. Another issue came to the table, Dementors. Dementors have served the Ministry for years, Barty said, frowning. Dumbledore warned of the danger. It seems the danger is real. It won't be easy to abolish Dementors soon, Johnny admitted. Dementors were more than mere jailers. They functioned as living inhibitors, preventing prisoners in Azkaban from retaining enough vitality to cause trouble, an effect few other magical creatures produced. Removing them would require a substitute. A wizard without a wand could still be dangerous in some places, and wandless magic was not as much of a blind spot outside Britain. Johnny said nothing more, but his expression suggested he had other ideas. Later, walking through the Ministry with Mr. Weasley, Harry felt supported but exhausted. Barty Crouch's interrogation had not convicted him. That alone was relief enough. Amelia Bones and others gathered around with kind faces. Barty Crouch is a skilled interrogator, Mr. Weasley told Harry after greeting Amelia. He pulled Harry close. This is good news. I want you back home so you can tell everyone. Molly will throw a party, Harry muttered. There's nothing to celebrate, Harry said suddenly, and Mr. Weasley started, worried. Johnny Silverhand. He was there too. He demanded Dumbledore be removed as headmaster. Is the Ministry mad? Mr. Weasley exclaimed. Now, when you know who has returned? Yes, right now. Harry's stomach turned at the thought. They say Dumbledore's education failed because a student outside school couldn't control his power and inflated his aunt. I'm sorry, but no one will blame you, Harry, Mr. Weasley said earnestly, hands on his shoulders like any father would. You did very well. Some things are beyond anyone's control. Harry tried to explain the churn in his chest, old grievances dredged up, and all of it tied back to Dumbledore. He'd always thought he could help Dumbledore. Now it felt as if he had done nothing. As they stepped into the elevator, Harry asked, how did Johnny Silverhand end up there? They call him a Ministry consultant. He must have given the Ministry a lot of money, Mr. Weasley said knowingly. Crouch's rise involved many galleons changing hands. Does Johnny Silverhand have a grudge against Dumbledore? Harry pressed. Mr. Weasley hesitated, then said more cautiously, I'm not sure. People always whisper about them together. Whisper about what? Things like the Second King. Johnny is mysterious. No one knows his face. He has a lot of money, and he has connections. Could they have a feud? Harry asked. Shh, Mr. Weasley warned. You can't say such things carelessly. He targets Dumbledore so much. Who else could it be besides Voldemort? Harry, Mr. Weasley's tone turned firm. He's not a Death Eater. If anything, he's been at odds with the Death Eaters. I can guarantee you that. As head of a department under the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Mr. Weasley knew a little more. Johnny Silverhand's attitude toward the Death Eaters was reportedly fierce. He would not join them. Stories even said Johnny had once confronted Voldemort in a graveyard. Still, Johnny's presence and the way he made Dumbledore squirm felt like a threat. The elevator doors opened. In the lobby, there were few people. Harry saw a wizard and a witch standing by the Fountain of Magical Brethren, their conversation low and easy. "How's Rippy?" one asked. "He's fine. You don't need to worry. That mission has been going on too long. Sorry, I can't tell you the details. Are you free this week?" "What? Are you asking me out?" "Why not?" "You're different. You never used to be like this, Arthur." The witch's voice was smoky, giving her an unexpected sensuality. She greeted Mr. Weasley with a smile. "Oz." "Good afternoon," he replied. Chapter 256. Mr. Weasley leaned toward Harry and murmured, "This is an experienced Auror who was just reassigned from field duty." Oz's gaze dropped to Harry, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Is this Harry Potter?" she asked, smiling and nodding at him. The wizard standing beside her caught the sight of them, and a strange light kindled in his own eyes. "Long time no see, Arthur," he said to Mr. Weasley. Mr. Weasley blinked awkwardly. "Tangmi, you're here." "I'm waiting for someone," Tangmi chuckled. "I'm off duty, so I figured I'd hang about." "Is that so? Well, I won't keep you then." Mr. Weasley, sensing the conversation had run its course, steered Harry toward the exit. At the last moment, Harry caught sight of the fountain basin and stopped. "Wait." He dug out his coin pouch and dumped everything into the pool. He glanced up at the house elf and wondered what Hermione would say if she saw this. Mr. Weasley interpreted it as a charitable gesture. There was a sign by the fountain that all coins would be donated to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. What he didn't know was Harry's private promise. If the charges were dropped, he had vowed to give 10 galleons. More than 10 had certainly gone in now. "All right, Harry, I'll see you back," Mr. Weasley said as the lift gate opened. A silver mask emerged from the lift. Tangmi stepped forward and said, "Sir," with obvious respect. Mr. Weasley was swept by the man's gaze and instinctively took 2 steps back toward Harry. Harry recognized the silver mask from the courtroom, exactly the same. A chill tightened his relaxed mood. He was suddenly back under that courtroom scrutiny and remembered the graveyard scene where Johnny Silverhand had publicly confronted Dumbledore. There was clearly a connection between the two. From Johnny Silverhand's tone and the single address of Professor, Harry guessed he might have been a Hogwarts student once. The man's look brushed over Harry without lingering and moved on to Oz. He nodded to her, and she answered with a quick smile. That cold, passing glance was the second time Harry had been treated like that, once in the graveyard when he had been standing behind Dumbledore, and now again in the Ministry, standing behind Mr. Weasley. It seemed this man's eyes refused to acknowledge him. Harry wanted to ask why Dumbledore had been suspended as headmaster, but Mr. Weasley pulled him away. The man in the silver mask halted, looked at them, then strode past Mr. Weasley and stopped beside Harry. He removed a money bag and tipped the contents into the fountain, the galleon spilling like a golden waterfall that gilded the pool. Mr. Weasley's eyes widened. That single pour was at least half a year's wages for him. Whether in the Muggle world or the Wizarding one, a deep, rough voice said. Harry realized it addressed him, though the tone was easy, almost indifferent. "Hospitals are always important." Harry opened his mouth to answer. The voice continued, directed at Tangmi. "The land you bought the last time, hasn't anything been built on it yet?" Tangmi bowed. "No, sir. Build a hospital there. Offer free care to some patients." Harry felt the man's silver mask somehow turn gilded in his perception. The power of money was nearly blinding. The casualness of ordering a hospital built as easily as buying groceries made Harry's expression blank. "Goodbye, Harry," the man said as he turned and walked toward the fireplaces. Harry watched them go and asked uncertainly, "Did he just talk to me?" Mr. Weasley, still a little dazed by the display of wealth, replied, "I think so." Chapter 281, Horcrux and Tracing Inside Silverhand Manor, the golden cup rested beneath a crystal dome. John stood over it, a floating copy of Secrets of the Darkest Arts turning pages as his fingers skimmed the air. "The creation of a Horcrux involves splitting the soul," he muttered. The book turned itself under his touch. John read on. "Horcruxes have exceptional magical resistance and are notoriously difficult to destroy. Ordinary charms won't touch them. Objects containing Horcruxes become extraordinarily durable. To destroy one, he could use Fiendfire or the silver-veined sword, but he didn't need either. He had already destroyed 2 of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes. Excluding Harry, 4 remained. With one of them now in his possession, the Golden Cup, John planned to use it to locate the others. Horcruxes were linked to one another. He'd confirmed that connection through Harry. But the Golden Cup had no consciousness, like living things such as Harry or Nagini. Voldemort could influence others through it, but could not form a psychic bridge the way he might with a living mind. John lifted the dome. A whispering came from the cup, like a demon's seduction, but John's expression stayed hard. "So arrogant, your master," the whisper hissed. John wrapped black threads of magic around the cup, initiating a soul-eating spell. The voice from within rose in strength. His own power ebbed as he drew on the cup. The effort strained him. He glanced at a replica of Gryffindor's sword lying nearby, and with a thought, cast an object summoning charm. The sword flew to his hand and linked to the cup. The soul-eating threads began to wrench a distorted fragment of soul out of the golden cup. Sweat formed on John's brow. Tearing soul matter directly still taxed him. He pushed harder. The fragment resisted, but it gave ground. When the force surged, some of the Horcrux power funneled into the replica sword. Only a portion, but enough for John to use. His right hand went silver, then rapidly blackened. 5 magic crystals flowed their energy into the Philosopher's Stone he possessed, restoring his drained power. The captured soul power lunged at his arm. John's pupils narrowed to vertical slits as black magic bathed him. He cut down with his wand hand. The entangling Horcrux fragment withered as if struck by a heavy blow. A sliver of its power transferred into the replica sword. John returned the golden cup to its dome and clapped his hands. A magic circle bloomed on the sword as Voldemort's power was forcibly injected into it. A brief silver flash raced along the blade and vanished. John grinned. "It has accepted the Horcrux's power and established a link," he said, holding the sword close to the cup. The gem on the cup pulsed with a startling light, like a Horcrux detector reacting. He gave the blade a new name. "From now on, you'll be called the Marvolo Sword." The replica accepted the moniker, and with the infused Horcrux energy, the Marvolo sword gained an extra dark edge to its damage. Satisfied, John closed the crystal dome and set off, channeling magic into the sword. "Trace blood," he intoned. There was no blood to trace, but there was the power of Lord Voldemort's Horcrux. The ripple from the Marvolo sword spread outward. John felt a tug, faint, blurred, pointing him in a direction within London. The pendant at his chest vibrated. "Sirius?" "No, black," he muttered, pupils contracting as he stared at the pendant. If the Marvolo sword wasn't wrong, the vibration indicated the location of another Horcrux. It couldn't be Sirius. It had to be somewhere connected to the Black family, perhaps the old Black house. John looked at the Marvolo sword, weighing whether to verify the reading. The idea that another of Voldemort's Horcruxes might be right under Dumbledore's nose unsettled him. Was fate playing tricks? Chapter 257. Which Horcrux is it? John frowned. He had already examined the Black family's collection. Logically, if there were a Horcrux among their possessions, he should have found it. Had Sirius not shown him everything last time? A wash of frustration ran through him. He wanted to go back to the Order of the Phoenix, but if he did, the Order might move again. "It's connected to the Black family," he muttered, "so it can't be like the diary incident." In his second year, Voldemort's diary had been brought into Hogwarts by Ginny Weasley. John had assumed an outsider had smuggled it in, but the Marvolo sword's feedback had shown it belonged to the Blacks. Only the person who took it could be called its owner. Apart from Sirius, most of the Black line was effectively gone. Then a name flashed into his mind: Narcissa Malfoy. Narcissa Black, daughter of that ancient house, now Lucius's wife and Draco's mother. He needed a way to see her without attracting Voldemort or Lucius. The easiest route was through Draco. Narcissa wasn't a Death Eater. She was clever and fiercely protective of her family. John hoped she would help. He slid the Marvolo sword into his satchel and left Silverhand Manor, sending a discreet message to Draco. Draco was puzzled at first by his friend's request to meet Narcissa, but he trusted John and relayed the message. "Your friend really wants to see me?" Narcissa asked, surprised when Draco told her. She had never been one to act on impulse, but she could infer things from her son's few words. Whatever this friend was, he was decisive, ambitious, and seemed devoted to protecting those close to him. "Arrange a time with him," she told Draco. "I'll go." Draco offered to come along, but Narcissa refused. She didn't want her son mixed up in whatever she might be doing. She had seen too much of Lucius's world. She had watched Lucius change, not into something else entirely, but into someone with a gap in his memory. The part that seemed missing involved Johnny Silverhand. Lucius used to call him Mr. Silverhand, with deference. Now he used his given name, as if that old respect had been erased. If Voldemort's return had made him arrogant, he would still have kept that respect. Lucius knew what Johnny was capable of. The only remaining, absurd explanation was that Lucius had suppressed or lost that memory, and it was likely connected to Johnny. Narcissa remembered Lucius once saying, excited and relieved. Mr. Silverhand had promised to take away the dark mark. He had wanted to stop being known as a Death Eater for Draco's sake. She had looked away when he lowered himself to kneel before Voldemort, and she had been terrified for him. Bitterly, she thought, "Lord Voldemort, why are you still alive? Wouldn't it be better if you were dead so our family could get out of this whirlpool?" Meanwhile, in a quiet garden somewhere else, a voice wailed, "I was wrong, Mr. Silverhand. Please let me go." John closed the book in front of him with a sigh. The cover was black with gilded letters, a ringed hand embossed on it. Mundungus had been escorted to him. The man crawled and begged. Tangmi frowned and booted him aside. "Mundungus, you stole my money." John ran a fingertip across the golden letters and said, "I didn't kill you. That's charity." "Sir, I know, you wouldn't kill Mundungus," the man sobbed, snot and tears mixing. "I'll pay you back. Please don't send me back to that place." Mundungus had been sold to the alchemy workshop as a test subject for new potions when he couldn't pay his debts. 6 days a week in the hospital had broken him. "Then tell me," John said coolly, "how do you plan to pay back my money? The only value you have left is a healthy body." Mundungus shuddered and stammered. John tossed a scrap of parchment onto the table. Names were written there, each with a price. "Kill them," he said casually. Mundungus trembled violently. Every name was a Death Eater. No, I can't." "Pity," John said, his face going cold. "Then you have no use." No amount of pleading saved Mundungus from being hauled away. Tangmi stepped in just in time. "Mrs. Malfoy is already waiting in the garden," she murmured. "You handle the rest," John said, tucking the book under his arm. He ran his hand over the small mask on the table. It dissolved into a mist of silver. He didn't need an entourage to meet Narcissa. "Don't let Mundungus die," he added. "He still has 100 potions to swallow." "The Silver Cross Hospital is on standby," Tangmi said. "He'll finish them." John walked to the far end of the garden. Nocturne Alley's number 2 garden tea room, room 1001. Nocturne Garden, one of Johnny Silverhand's creations, had become a daytime draw, the safe face of Nocturne Alley. Lavender scented the air. A gentle breeze stirred the bushes. Narcissa sat at a small table, a teaspoon circling the coffee and milk in her cup. When she saw the boy approaching along the cobblestones, a copy of Tales of Beetle the Bard tucked under his arm, she felt momentarily underwhelmed. He was young, dark-haired, casually dressed in a loose wool sweater that gave him a scholarly look. He appeared harmless, almost boyish. She had expected something different of the person her son's friend claimed to be. John smiled and nodded as he reached the table. "Mrs. Malfoy," he said. A waiter placed a glass of water down. John set the book on the table. "Just a storybook." Narcissa barely glanced at it. "Draco said you wanted to see me," she said, hiding irritation. "If it's about his studies, you've come to the wrong person." John tilted his head. "This isn't our first meeting, Mrs. Malfoy." He took a sip of water. "How is Lucius?" Narcissa's eyes flashed at his use of Lucius's given name. It was oddly familiar coming from him. John laughed softly. "Don't be like that, Narcissa. There are things I'd like you to tell me." The tone of his voice changed in a way that stopped her. It dipped low and hoarse, a timbre she had never expected to hear from someone so young. A possibility she had not wanted to entertain surged into her mind. Her hand trembled. Coffee sloshed onto the saucer. You couldn't be," she blurted, uncertain. John smiled, amused. "Surprised?" he murmured. "By my youth, or by how frank I can be with you?" The low chuckle that followed drilled into Narcissa's ears and sent her thoughts careening. No one had ever seen Johnny Silverhand's true face. He was a legend, the king of Nocturne Alley, the second king of the wizarding world. The idea that he might actually be a student, so young, so ordinary looking, was absurd. If it was true, if Johnny Silverhand really stood before her like this, why would he meet her in such a manner? The question hung between them, heavy and impossible, as Narcissa stared at the boy who might be more than he seemed. Chapter 258. Is he going to abandon Malfoy? Is he going to kill me? A swarm of chaotic thoughts buzzed around Narcissa like nargles. John snapped his fingers and the chaos eased. She stared at him. John, why are you contacting Draco? Lucius is already working for you. Contacting Draco? John chuckled. You should understand cause and effect. It's not because Draco is Lucius's son that I'm contacting him, John continued, rubbing his ring with an indifferent expression, but because Lucius is Draco's father, that I'm giving him a chance. Narcissa took a deep breath and asked carefully, I only have one question. What is Draco to you? She was terrified, worried he might use her son to threaten the Malfoy family. John met her eyes and answered sincerely, a friend. He and I are friends, the kind of friendship where we give everything. Relief washed over Narcissa. She couldn't use legitimacy, but she could see the earnestness in his face. Thinking about how Draco had changed over the years, she was grateful. Thank you. Draco is lucky to have a friend like you. No need to thank me. Friends are friends. John shook his head. I called you out because I have something to ask. May I ask one thing first? Narcissa barely dared to be as presumptuous as before. Why are you being so open with me? Because I think you need a sense of security right now, John said. The Malfoy family is standing on dangerous ground. This is my way of showing trust. Narcissa's expression softened. I thank you again. Back to the main point. John tapped the table. The spilled coffee vanished. About your family, the Blacks. The Blacks? Narcissa startled. I've been away from that place for years. I want to know about the Black family descendants, your siblings. John's tone made clear this was important. He wanted to find out who might have brought a Horcrux into the old Black house. Narcissa recalled their family briefly. This generation of the Blacks had 2 sons and 3 daughters. The eldest daughter, Bellatrix, married Rodolphus Lestrange and became a Death Eater. The second daughter, Andromeda, married a Muggle-born wizard and was disowned. The third daughter, Narcissa, married Lucius. The Blacks are pure-blood supremacists, she added, voice thick with disgust, which is why my cousin Sirius ran away from home and was removed from the family tapestry. She explained that the House of Black was almost entirely Slytherin. Sirius was the exception, a Gryffindor, which only worsened his standing. When she mentioned one name, her face changed. Regulus Black was the family's favorite. He was our pride. Everyone admired his choices. He was a Slytherin and at 16 joined the Death Eaters, following the Dark Lord's rise. His parents were so proud. She looked at the boy sitting opposite her as if seeing Regulus again. He was different from the rest of us. He was kind to Creature and felt a strong sense of family responsibility. I think that's why he joined. Until one day he died. No one knew how. His mother went mad over it. Narcissa choked on the memory. He was such a good boy. I'm so afraid that Draco might end up the same way, dying without explanation. From that day, everything changed, she said, staring off. 2 years later, Lord Voldemort fell. John listened without comment. Is it possible Regulus brought something back? Or Bellatrix? He asked. He needed to know whether one of them might be connected to the Horcrux. Narcissa shook her head. I don't know. Bellatrix was in Azkaban. She hardly ever came home. During those years, Regulus was the only one around. As for Regulus, she added, you should ask Creature. He knows more than I do. She meant the house elf of the Black family. Thank you. John stood, and Narcissa shook his hand. After he left, John felt he could narrow his investigation to 2 people. Chapter 283, Prefect and Friends. John sat for a while, thinking, then stood and picked up Tales of Beetle the Bard. Perhaps, he murmured, he could try another approach. He walked out toward the garden and found the gardener tending flowers. Very beautiful, John said. No matter how beautiful the flowers are, they merely cover the decaying corpses in the soil, the gardener answered flatly. To make vibrant flowers bloom on rotting, foul-smelling earth, John said with a subdued laugh, perhaps that is the meaning of sacrifice. The gardener's hand paused. After a moment, he said, perhaps you're right. Do you mind if I take one? John asked. The gardener didn't reply. John plucked a rose and walked away, nodding slightly to the man. The gardener stood still, shovel in one hand and the other sleeve empty. He looked up, revealing a pale face. Barty Crouch Jr. Back home, the dozens of people who'd once stood outside the house had dwindled to 3. One was the tall man John had seen before. When John returned, the remaining staff bowed. "Young master," they said respectfully. Inside, John overheard a domestic argument about whether to move house. "We're fine here. Why leave?" one of them asked. Watson, John's father, rubbed his hands awkwardly. Mrs. Wick said, "There's no place to put the wizard chess you sent." Ah, so that was the issue. John looked at his father, certain it had been his idea. Watson protested. "It cost a fortune. Should we buy it and not use it?" "I don't think a house big enough for wizard chess would be cheaper." John wasn't fussed about his living space. More importantly, this house had many spells John himself had cast. Moving would mean redoing everything. He reached for the human-sized golden wizard chess pieces and shrank them one by one. Watson cried out and clung to the king piece, refusing to let go. That king had been modeled after Watson and could even move off the board. "Wife, look at him," Watson complained to Mrs. Wick, but the golden Mrs. Wick appeared and walked down. The golden king, who'd been clinging on for dear life a moment before, immediately let go and allowed itself to be led away by the golden queen. Watson, abandoned and on the verge of tears, begged, "At least leave me one." The shrunk pieces were packed into the chess box. John hesitated, then pulled out the golden king and a silver king and tossed them to the floor. The 2 kings, one gold and one silver, returned to life-sized form on landing and stood by the doorway. Watson brightened, ran over to admire his handsome face, and felt reassured. The remaining pieces were kept by Watson, who clearly wanted to experiment by dropping them to see if they'd enlarge. Mrs. Wick soon took them away. Up in the attic, Basil the owl swooped in. The poor bird had been underused lately. Tom chased his tail at the sight of Basil and was sent spinning by the flap of the owl's wing. John opened the letter Basil had brought, the start of term notice and the book list. "It seems Oz Healed has passed," he said. He glanced at the Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook, Dark Arts Defense Guide, an Auror training manual. His badge buzzed. A message arrived. A group chat. "Draco Malfoy, I'm a prefect." "How could it be you?" "Where's John?" "Why isn't John a prefect?" "Are you one too?" "Shut up. Draco is Slytherin prefect? I thought it would be John. Draco's popularity isn't quite suitable." "Hey, Cedric, show some respect to the prefect." "Sorry, I'm head boy." "How nostalgic. I used to be head boy too." "Oh, please, it's just a prefect. I'm a bow buttons champion." "I wonder who the Gryffindor prefect is." "Shh, it's not you anyway." The chat buzzed on. Everyone had been busy over the holidays. Fleur complained about work at Silver Hand Angel Investment. Percy grumbled about small problems at the office. Neville said many relatives had come to celebrate his parents' recovery. Daphne teased that Astoria seemed to have fallen in love. Owls kept flying into her room. John smiled as he scrolled, glad to see Malfoy and the others on fairly normal footing, despite everything that had happened. Chapter 259. Draco Malfoy cleared his throat. "Ahem. It's normal for girls to fall in love." Daphne Greengrass frowned. "But that owl looks familiar." "It's just an illusion. All owls look alike. How could you recognize it?" Draco replied. "All right," Daphne said reluctantly. Although they hadn't met in a while, the Constellation Hub kept everyone connected. John closed the constellation, feeling pleased. His gaze wandered across the books on the table and darkened. Things would be livelier if everyone were here. Basil, restless, began squawking. John looked up to see a snowy owl fly in through the window. Hedwig. He held Basil back just as the 2 birds were about to come to blows and fed Hedwig a small dried fish, tucking it into her beak. Hedwig shot Basil a provocative look, and Basil fluffed his wings in irritation. Hedwig had come bearing a letter, not for Harry, but for John. John opened the envelope and read a long message from Hermione. She apologized about the serious situation. They hadn't known that the muggle was Mr. Wick. She wrote about Harry's hearing. Mrs. Weasley had been cooking him lots of good meals since he returned. Hermione had been made a prefect, and Ron had as well. Everyone thought it would be Harry. Mrs. Weasley thought so most of all. She wanted to throw a big party to celebrate, Hermione wrote. But Harry seems off. I think he's disappointed. He feels Dumbledore is avoiding him, maybe thinking Harry cost him his position, even though we've told him Dumbledore wouldn't think that way. Oh, by the way, Hermione added, have you seen the new Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook? I've never seen it before. Tonks says it's Auror training material, so the new professor might be very good. Hermione's letter went on and on. Despite everything with the Order of the Phoenix, their friendship remained intact. John felt warmed by the trust and fed Hedwig another dried fish before telling her to wait. He wasn't surprised that Dumbledore had made Hermione a prefect. Hermione had earned the most house points for Gryffindor. Ron's prefect badge made sense too. Dumbledore, John figured, was probably trying to help Ron build confidence after last year. For the Weasleys, staunch supporters of Dumbledore, focusing on Ron was natural. Basil had somehow hopped onto the table and, seeing John turn away, lunged to snatch Hedwig's treat. The two snowy owls resumed their tussle while Tom barked below in encouragement. John put quill to paper and began composing his reply. As he tidied scattered feathers from the table, his pen paused over a question. Should he ask Hermione to look for a Horcrux? He hesitated. No, he would find it himself. He didn't want to drag Hermione into something that would make her vulnerable. The Horcrux's custody would be contested between him and the Order. Let Hermione remain an outsider. He sealed his letter, fed Hedwig one last dried fish, stroked her head, and said softly, "Give this to Hermione." He tucked 5 more dried fish into a small bag for her. Hedwig flew off happily as Basil pecked John's finger in protest. John made Basil a small heap of dried fish instead. Tom paced anxiously until John gave him his dog food. He ate so fast he bit through his bowl. John's reply traveled to Grimmauld Place. Hermione received it during the party celebrating Ron's new prefect status. "See, John wouldn't hurt you," Hermione said, pointing at the dried fish Hedwig had brought. "Maybe he just likes Hedwig," Harry muttered, still troubled by the memory of John almost cutting off his godfather's hand. Plus, missing out on the prefect role had put him in a sour mood. "John isn't as bad as you think," Hermione snapped. Ron, with his mouth full, mumbled, "Everyone knows John likes small animals." Hermione glared at him, trying to keep the peace between her two friends. She'd been worried ever since Harry came back from the hearing. He'd been different, and that worried her. Harry wasn't John. If he were, she wouldn't be so concerned. Under Hermione's watchful gaze, Harry forced a smile. Maybe things would feel better once school started. He glanced at the newspapers on the table. The Wizengamot had revoked Dumbledore's position, and Dumbledore had publicly announced Voldemort's return. The public refused to believe it. Some thought Dumbledore had gone mad. For some reason, the Ministry remained silent. Chapter 284, Mundungus's Repayment and the Train. Flourish and Blotts had sent John's school textbooks by owl post. For a price, several times the normal postage, they were happy to deliver. Basil had been busy lately delivering John's mail everywhere. Among the items that came in, John was most interested in a letter from Horace Slughorn, the former Slytherin head of house, potions master, and collector of connections. John had met Slughorn through Damo Alex. They were pen pals of a sort. As a former Slytherin head, Slughorn took a special interest in promising Slytherin students. He and John corresponded occasionally. John thought Slughorn was a lot like him, both Slytherins who cultivated networks. The difference was that John used those connections for weightier matters, while Slughorn mostly enjoyed the vanity of having them. They'd been in touch for about 2 years. Besides discussing potions, they sent gifts, mead, candied pineapple. Slughorn had helped John with advice on the soul potion and other curiosities, though John hadn't adopted every suggestion. Slughorn had also heard about John's thesis on the blood curse from Damo Alex and had written in awe, "John, you surprise me. A child your age completing a thesis with someone like Damo Alex. He was one of the most talented students I ever taught. Regarding blood magic, I see your role was indispensable. If only I were still teaching, I'd be proud to have a student like you." Slughorn admired talent and regretted his retirement. His favorite students were the outstanding ones, and his judgment had been good. He had other memories he didn't like to dwell on, though. Lily Evans, a student he adored, who was later killed by another of his pupils. That guilt haunted him. John dipped his quill to reply. He had a few questions about obscure taboos only Slughorn might answer. Basil munched his dried fish, which John swapped for the outgoing letter, then sent him off with a pat on the head. Basil protested. He hadn't finished his snack. John glanced at the dry fish Tom had snatched and said calmly, "When you get back, I'll give you new ones." Basil flew away, and Riddle arrived carrying Tangmi's letter in a small box. "My lord," Riddle said, "Mundungus stole some things and hopes to use them as repayment." John opened the box. Inside were some exquisite silver items, several of them magically enchanted. He unfolded a purple sleeping robe. It sprang to life and tried to strangle him. John's wardrobe opened of its own accord, and a wizard's robe with a silver mask burst out, wrapping around and subduing the purple robe, tossing it to the floor. "Where did he get these?" John asked. He picked up a music box. Its tune made the head feel sluggish. He closed it casually. He'd seen the piece before. Mundungus was, of course, a thief. The rogue robe lay knotted and subdued. The items were from the Black family house, family valuables that a careless thief could compromise. John twisted the music box in his hand. The sound made Tom drowsy, and John chuckled. Not a bad method. He wrote to Tang Mi that the goods Mundungus had taken could cover part of the debt, but only part. Given Mundungus's nature, if he knew some debt could be offset, he'd become bolder. And because Mundungus never stated his whereabouts plainly, even Dumbledore's legitimacy might not pinpoint him. That was an important detail. John shook his head at the Order's choices. "Look at the people you've chosen, Dumbledore. You truly are old and muddled." A family thief in the Order of the Phoenix, was Dumbledore too trusting? John glanced at Tom. Young dogs were hardy. Tom was asleep already. John placed the music box beside him so Tom could have a new toy. He snapped his fingers, and the crumpled purple robe obediently flew into his hand. He clapped to make it lay flat, then set the enchanted pieces aside to be catalogued later. Chapter 260. A magic circle bloomed on the bathrobe, and with a flick of his finger, the robe flew up and stuck to the ceiling. John never wore other people's clothes. August 31st. One day until school started. John left home early and went to the Silverhand Johnny store. Everything there, except for Tang Mi, had been taken over by Jin Ledisley. In the secret garden, John found Jin, who had left Ilvermorny and let his golden hair grow long. Jin stood at an easel, paintbrush in hand. A canvas showed a field of sunflowers, already a perfect painting. He had stopped midway and stared into empty space, lost. He set the brush down and, almost without thinking, ran his fingers through the wet paint. The picture smeared under his touch. "I can't paint it," Jin said. John was calm. "You don't have to force it." Jin laughed bitterly, raking his paint-streaked hand through his hair and smudging color into his gold locks. "I want to see it one more time." "Everyone wants to see it one more time," John said, walking over to rest a hand on Jin's shoulder. "Paint one for me." Jin wordlessly took the canvas down and set a fresh one in its place. John watched, then tightened his grip on his copy of Beetle the Bard and murmured, "Yes, who wouldn't want to see it one more time?" September 1st. Back to school bustle at Hogwarts. After leaving Nocturne Alley, John had slipped into Gringotts under the Lestrange identity and re-entered that vault. Griffook had sent him out with a smile. Lestrange's vault was full again, and to the goblins anything put into Gringotts was as good as theirs. John didn't care. He apparated to King's Cross. He walked through the station, paused before heading for the barrier, and saw a gathering. Harry and his friends, flanked by a security detail that would have made even the Minister of Magic look underprovided. John only glanced and moved toward the wall. Passing through, he emerged on platform 9¾ "John!" Pansy Parkinson stood alone, her face sour. Crabbe and Goyle trailed behind, glancing around and rubbing their left arms with their right hands. John approached. "Where's Draco?" Pansy huffed. "He's showing off his prefect badge." "That sounds like him." John shrugged and then turned to the two hulking boys. "Goyle, Crabbe, come with me." He didn't wait for questions. His voice left no room. Pansy's expression brightened as they were shepherded into the train. John walked ahead, an invisible boundary of menace making students give him wide berth. Slytherins greeted him with deferential nods. Students from the other houses avoided looking at him. They found an empty compartment. John sat first. Crabbe and Goyle tried to slip away, but Pansy shoved them in. John snapped his fingers and the compartment door slammed shut. "Tell me," John said, leaning back, eyes half closed, tone dangerous. "Gregory Goyle, Vincent Crabbe, when did this happen?" Crabbe started to play dumb. "John, I don't know what you're talking about." John grabbed his left hand, prying it open. A dark sigil marked Crabbe's forearm. Crabbe's face drained of color. Don't open it here," he gasped. Goyle covered his head like a child. Pansy shrieked, "You! How could you do this?" "It wasn't me," Crabbe blurted. "It was my father." John released him and regarded the three of them with cold detachment. "Prove it," he said. Crabbe's lips trembled. "What?" A small silver knife appeared in John's palm and hovered between them. "Destroy it," John said quietly. "Either keep it and become my enemy, or destroy it and stay at Hogwarts." Their faces went ashen. Pansy looked ready to faint. John's voice dropped, conspiratorial and sharp. "Let me guess his task, to kill Harry Potter or John Wick. Is it a sneak attack?" "No." John watched their bodies quake and cut him off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Poisoning, right?" No, John. We didn't." Crabbe pleaded. "Prove it to me right here." He pushed. The two exchanged terrified looks. This was the King of Slytherin speaking, an order, not a question. Goyle, shaking, took up the knife. With a choked sound, he stabbed the blade into the dark mark on his arm, cutting through skin. Blood welled and ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps as sweat stood on his forehead. The mark split under the wound, and he screamed. Seeing Goyle do it finally made Crabbe decide. He grabbed the knife and did the same. Blood streamed from both arms, dripping and pooling on the compartment floor. Strangely, it didn't spread beyond the space. It seemed contained by some invisible barrier. Pansy clapped a hand over her mouth to hold back a scream. The cold left John's eyes. He laid a hand on Goyle's wound. Black threads wove through flesh. The dark mark faded, and the cut knit itself closed. The same thing happened to Crabbe. The blood on the floor drew together into two small, blood-colored puddles, each forming into a tiny, coiling snake. John picked one up and handed one to each boy, one for the left arm, one for the right. "You've saved your lives," he said. "You don't need to tell your fathers. I'll handle all of this. Stay here until Christmas." Lord Voldemort had wanted to place 2 student Death Eaters inside Hogwarts. The idea was foolish. John gave them a final glance, waved, and the compartment door opened. At that moment, Draco Malfoy arrived and saw Crabbe and Goyle stumbling out, clutching something. "What's wrong with them?" he asked. "Perhaps they have a stomachache," John said evenly. Malfoy, eager to show off, caught sight of Pansy. "Pansy, look at me. See what's different? I'm a prefect now." Pansy exploded. "You stinky brat who smells like an 82-year-old rotten skunk." She stormed out of the compartment, leaving Malfoy baffled. "What's her problem?" "Perhaps she has a stomachache," John repeated. Malfoy stared. Daphne Greengrass pushed through the crowd, frowned when she saw John, then brightened and tried to sit down beside him. Malfoy, quick to react, blocked her. "You're not leaving me to listen to Cedric alone." Under Daphne's murderous glare, Malfoy half dragged, half pulled her away to maintain order on the train. Prefects had duties and a special compartment, and Daphne hated the position. After they left, people filtered back in. Astoria Greengrass, Daphne's younger sister, smiled at John. "John," she greeted him. Then, hesitantly, "Are you all right? You look as if you have something on your mind." John touched his face, wondering if Crabbe and Goyle's blood had splattered on him earlier. "Nothing," he said, then smiled. "Your observation skills are sharp. You'd make an excellent Auror someday." Astoria flushed at the compliment. John turned and studied his reflection in the window. Had he really looked that obvious? The train rolled on, smoke from the engine drifting into the sky. Hermione, checking compartments as she patrolled, brightened when she saw him and stepped in. Ron reached out behind her but faltered. Astoria watched Hermione warily. Hermione put on a hesitant smile. "John," she said as she entered, and then, apologetically, "I'm sorry about what happened last time."